We shall now hear extracts from the opening statements of Monday, the 2nd of October.
This is a formal investigation into the collision between the vessels Bow Bell and the Marchioness, which took place on the River Thames at about 1:46 a.m. on the 20th of August 1989, over 11 years ago. The tragic loss of 51 lives. Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. John Prescott, directed that a formal investigation be held into the collision. I was appointed to conduct the investigation as Rec Commissioner. The purpose of a formal investigation is to ascertain in a public forum the cause of the collision and the loss of life which followed, and to consider what lessons can be learned in order to avoid a similar casualty in the future. I have also been asked to conduct a non-statutory inquiry into the identification of victims and to consider and to report on the procedures followed to establish the identity of the victims of the collision. I will now ask the counsel for the Attorney General, Mr. Tier, to open the investigation. Mr. Tier?
Thank you, sir. This collision was the worst on the River Thames since 1898. On the 9th of June 1983, there was a collision between a dredger and a passenger launch. The name of the vessel was Boulter. Nobody was hurt as a result of that collision. Captain McGaw wrote a minute about that collision. I now quote from part of that minute. The cause of this incident can only be put down to grossly inadequate visibility from the respective steering positions. Until such time of a requirement for excellent all-round visibility is made and enforced for all vessels, accidents of this nature will continue to occur, possibly with fatal results.
Thank you. Mr. Haddon Cave.
Yes, I appear on behalf of the Marchioness Action Group. The grief of the families and survivors remains just as real and painful today as it did in August 1989. They are anxious finally to know what happened to their loved ones, why, and who was responsible. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mansfield.
Sir, I appear with my learned friend Nigel Meeson for the Marchioness Contact Group, who comprise presently of 87 individuals and survivors and relatives. Now, those that I represent are equally grateful for the opportunity that the truth has finally been provided for it to be exposed, because no government before this was prepared to order a proper, full, fair and fearless inquiry. Now, the earlier inquiry that was conducted by the Marine Accident and Investigation Branch with its report in 1991 was not only conducted in public, but it was seriously flawed. At the resumed inquest in the spring of 1995, it's important to remember the jury returned a verdict of unlawful killing. The inquest, of course, however, was limited in its remit. But it has been said time and time again that this was in fact a disaster waiting to happen. Now, there can be no excuse as to why provision was not made in advance, let alone why action was not taken on the night to save lives. There should be, at long last, a sense of accountability and responsibility by those who undoubtedly contributed to this disaster. Thank you, my lord.
Thank you. Ms. Cameron?
Sir, I appear on behalf of Port of London Authority. Sir, there is poignancy today at the opening of this formal investigation, or what will be called a public inquiry. During the 11 years that have been lost, there have been other human disasters which have occurred on the road, rail, at sea and in the air. We hope there will be a cathartic comfort for those involved, that the facts will at last be fully and carefully examined in public.
Thank you. Mr. Seligman.
I represent effectively the crew of the Marchioness, Stephen Faldo through his widow and Andrew McGowan. Stephen died in the accident. I adopt my learned friend's analogy of a highway accident because it illuminates the terrible simplicity of the accident. An accident that was described in a radio transmission from the Bow timed 1:48:02 like this. It is a pleasure boat that we didn't see, sir. A simple running down accident. Thank you, my lord.
Mr. Purnell.
I appear on behalf of South Coast Shipping and British Dredging, the former owners of the Boulter. This is the third type of investigation of one type of another, and South Coast Shipping has cooperated fully with each of the earlier inquiries. Criticism has and will be levelled at those who were in command of the vessels at the time of the collision. South Coast Shipping will take any practical step to guard against the reoccurrence of such a tragedy. The distinction, we submit, must be drawn between changes and new measures which are with the benefit of hindsight and those which are shown to have been causative of the collision.
Mr. Reader.
Thank you, my lord. I appear on behalf of Tidal Cruises, the owners of the Marchioness. May I at once extend my sympathy and that of my clients to all those who have been bereaved. The primary facts in this case, once established, may give rise to differences of opinion on a variety of issues, but it has to be hoped that those views will be honestly expressed, even if at the end of the day a particular opinion is found to be flawed.
Miss MacDonald.
In this matter, I appear on behalf of the Environment, Transport and the Regions. The department is anxious to help this inquiry in every way possible to arrive at the cause of this terrible tragedy.
Mr. Thwaites, please.
I appear on behalf of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner.
Mr. Thwaites.
Yes, Lord. I appear on behalf of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. The central role of the police in the rescue operation has yet to be told. Officers did everything humanly possible to save lives. From midnight on Saturday, the 19th of August, 1989, there was a flood tide on the River Thames. No one who found themselves in the river could remain in the same place for long. The tide carrying everything along at a rate of at least 1.5 meters per second. Some of the casualties, many of them young, had already made their mark in business, the professions, and the arts, while others looked to be on the brink of glittering careers, as their previous accomplishments suggested. On behalf of the Commissioner, we express sympathy to all the families on their grievous loss.
Mr. Kaplan.
Sir, I speak last on behalf of Captain Henderson, the master of the Bobel. We would respectfully ask you, sir, to appreciate that Captain Henderson himself has suffered throughout this terrible tragedy. He has given no media interviews despite repeated requests to do so. I mention his trials, sir. We hope and are confident that you will not allow this to become the third of Captain Henderson's trials.
Thank you. We will now begin to hear the witness evidence, beginning with a passenger from the Marchioness. Jonathan Davis, please.
We shall now hear extracts from the evidence of Jonathan Davis, survivor from the Marchioness.
My apologies, my lord. Mr. Davis, thank you for attending today. I know it must be quite difficult for you. Now, you made a statement to the police on the 25th of August, 1989, and you gave evidence at the first inquests, a letter to the Hayes inquiry in 92, and an affidavit for the resumed inquest in 1995.
Correct.
And you were a passenger on the Marchioness that night?
Yes.
Boarding the vessel Marchioness at Charing Cross Pier?
Correct, yes.
When you first went aboard, were there company members or crew or any other officials of any kind asking to see whether you had a ticket?
No.
Or apparently counting numbers of passengers?
Not that I saw.
So where did you go first before the Marchioness set sail?
To the very front of the boat, on the outside.
And you estimated the boat leaving at around 1:15 a.m.?
Yes.
You moved then to the dance floor area?
Yes.
And am I right in thinking the dance floor was just behind the wheelhouse?
Yes.
So looking at paragraph 9 of your statement, you describe seeing an older man steering the boat, a younger one by his side, both wearing uniforms. I assumed the older one was the captain. The younger man left the wheelhouse. He returned a short time later with 2 glasses of beer. Both men consumed the beers in the wheelhouse, but they were not noticeably drunk. I did not see them consume any further alcohol.
Correct.
Okay, coming on to what happened next. What was the next thing that you recall?
There was some passage of time, not that long, and the floor began to slope away towards the back of the boat. I steadied myself on the arm of the door frame. I then instinctively pulled myself through the door frame and stepped practically into the water. I looked over my left shoulder and saw the bow of the bow bell. The bow, which seemed huge, it moved very quickly.
Just before you stepped into the water, I appreciate it's a long time ago, but had you heard anyone shouting to you, whistling or waving from another vessel?
No, nothing at all.
In the water, do you recall what happened then?
My head went underwater, and when I came to, there was no Marchioness. After a few seconds, life preservers floated to the surface. The Bobel was already going past me, and I was already being pushed in the opposite direction.
Were you able to say where in the river you were?
I had no idea at all.
Please tell us then what happened next.
I was holding onto a life raft, calling out. The head started bobbing up, and I started to pull people on.
Did you see any of the people you had been standing with on the Marchioness seconds before?
No.
Please tell us how you eventually got out of the river itself.
Well, eventually a police vessel came alongside us and pulled everyone on board.
Thank you. No further questions, my lord. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Tier?
Yes, my lord, just one. Mr. Davis, paragraph 10 of your statement on page 1961, you refer to the fact that the policeman who took your statement informed you that the police were not interested in the crew drinking alcohol. You say, as a result of this statement, I did not make any formal statement about the crew consuming alcohol before now.
Yes, that is right.
Thank you.
Mr. Davis, I'm Mr. Seligman. I represent the crew of the Marchioness. You saw these two men, one younger, one older.
Yes.
You saw these glasses. You said it looked like beer. Shandy?
It was a beer-like substance in a pint glass. I mean, that's all I can tell you.
So if I could take all your references to alcohol and insert the word shandy, instead, you could not tell me I was wrong, could you?
No.
Thank you.
Could I ask the witness just one question on behalf of the Port of London Authority? Mr. Davies, could you tell me while you were observing the two men in the wheelchair, did you hear the radio at all?
I do not recall hearing a radio, no.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. You're excused.
We shall now hear extracts from the evidence of Terence Blaney, lookout on the dredger Bobel.
Mr. Blaney, I think your own counsel, Mr. Russell Flint, would like to put some questions to you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Blaney. Mr. Blaney, I'm over here. Mr. Blaney.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I see ya.
Ah, yes. Mr. Blaney, did you start off your experiences upon the sea in 1964 when you were age 16?
That is correct.
You then became an ordinary seaman, and then after a period of very able seaman, you had considerable experience both abroad and in this country at sea, on inshore waters and tidal rivers. Did you join East Coast aggregates around this time? Let's see, 1980. Hold on a second, Mr. Blaney. Yes, around the time of 1981.
Oh yes, I think that was right. Yeah, it was. Well, I'm not sure. I remember now.
So you were rather qualified as a.
Yes, I am rather qualified. So that's right. That's right.
All right. So moving on, in August of 1989, you were asked to return to the Bobel early to return to the boat because you had to replace George Page, who had broken his toe.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. On the night we are concerned with, Mr. Brennan, when you first saw the Marchioness, she was off your starboard side on a parallel course about 20 to 25 feet away. And if she had maintained that course, you would have no cause for alarm.
Well, if we had carried on straight on our course, she would have probably passed 25 feet away or something like that.
And what happened as you continued?
Well, we carried on along the centre heading towards the centre arch. After a few seconds, she turned to the porter and as if to head through the centre arches. And that's from when we were going through. And then there was this big bang and we just hit her.
When you saw the alteration, what did you do?
Well, I told Eddie. She was coming across us and I was screaming and shouting and whistling at the Marchioness to draw her attention.
Did you try and attract the attention of Captain Henderson?
I may have been whistling one way and turning and waving and the other, and everything happened so fast, you know?
All right, thank you, sir. No further questions.
Mr. Blaney, did you understand it to be your duty when on the forecastle to keep a lookout?
Not specifically to keep a lookout, just look out.
No master on the Bow Bell or any shore employee from the office gave you instructions on how to keep a lookout, so it was simply left to you to do what you thought best?
Yes, I believe so.
In paragraph 10 of your statement, you say, at the time, I was responsible for undertaking general lookout duties and to report to Captain Henderson any object or vessel that looked as if it was in a dangerous position.
Yes, exactly.
Are you able to explain why it was that you did not see the Marchioness before Southwark Bridge?
No, I cannot.
No further questions.
Mr. Haddon Cave.
Mr. Blaney, now you were drinking in the hours before you went on duty. I mean, was it your normal habit to drink 4 cans of ale and 4 pints of lager in your time off when you were serving on the Bow Bell?
No.
I mean, that was totally irresponsible, was it not, Mr. Blaney, to drink so much before going back on duty?
Well, I felt okay.
You knew you were going to be up late that night and had to be awake and alert.
Yes, and I was awake and I was alert.
Well, you were certainly not sober, were you?
Well, no, but I weren't drunk.
Now, you had been awake for roughly 19 and a half hours up to the point of the accident.
Yeah.
Now, had you ever used walkie-talkies when you were looking about on the Bow Bell?
No.
Just prior to the collision, you overtook another passenger vessel, the Hurlingham. As you drew nearer, you were looking, were you not, intently at the Hurlingham, because there were lots of girls on board dancing inside.
Well, at that distance, you couldn't see. You know, it was a fair way off. You know, you couldn't actually make out faces and legs and all things that you like to look at. You know.
Throughout this period, between Waterloo, Blackfriars, and up to Southwark Bridge, you had the Marchioness pretty much in front of you and the Hurlingham slightly to the starboard side. Now, the puzzle is why you never saw the Marchioness.
Yes, well, I do not know.
Well, I suggest to you the simple reason you did not see her is because you were gawping at the Hurlingham.
No.
Well, anyone who has seen a strobe light in a disco will know you can see everyone clearly in a flash.
Okay, I think we have the point Mr. Haddon gave. Thank you.
No further questions.
Mr. Mansfield?
Yes, Mr. Blaney, I'm over here. I represent the Marchioness contact group. I'm just going to clarify a point that was made by your lawyer earlier, Mr. Russell Flint, that you had in fact started your career, I see from my papers, in 1964 as an able seaman. Now, just to follow up on a couple of topics, because that would make you very experienced, the first point that you are making very clearly is that on the night in question, you did not have a duty as lookout. You merely looked out as a matter of course.
That is right.
Right. So looking out as a matter of course, which is the thing that you did most often between the bridges and not beyond. Can I ask you to cast your mind back to the night of the 20th? Now, if you had spotted the Marchioness up ahead near the central channel, looking as if she was going towards the central arch of Southwark Bridge, would you have told Captain Henderson?
Not at that time. I would have seen how things shaped up, you know?
Not at that time. Well, at what point do you think you would have told him?
If we were coming up to the bridge and she was, well, and going to instruct us in some way, you know?
Well, how far from the bridge?
I can't say how far from anywhere, you know?
No, I am sorry. I do know that you're not very good at judging distances, but perhaps we could do it by length of your own vessel.
Well, probably a ship and a half, 2 ships. I don't know.
All right. Now I'm going to suggest to you that even that is really just not enough if you are going faster than the vessel directly in front. Now, it does take 2 ship lengths of the Bobel for her to stop, does it not?
I don't really know.
You don't know? Have you any idea what the captain can see from the bridge of the Bobel when going between the 2 bridges?
Well, he can see a long way.
At one time or another, everything?
Yes, at one time or another.
And in fact, does that explain what you said on occasions after the incident? And it's in wit 00072 for my colleagues. I thought he knew the Marchioness was there. I just assumed he knew.
I can't really remember what I was thinking then, you know?
Or was it apparent to you that the pleasure craft on the River Thames generally had bad vision aft?
Well, not then. On a ship, you don't take much notice of boats.
Well, no, indeed. That's the problem. You have quite rightly pointed out that if you had been getting your job wrong all these years, that basically you're not a lookout, but you're looking out, right?
Yeah.
Yes, if you had been getting that wrong, you'd expect someone from the company or the captain to come along and say, hey, look, you're not supposed to be doing it that way.
What the skipper should have said.
Yes, and there's 3 skippers involved here, Captain Niven, Burley, and now Henderson, and none of them ever said to you at any point in your career that you were doing anything remotely wrong, did they?
No.
And certainly the company never did, then or now.
No.
So may I make it plain that you yourself did not think that you had a duty of lookout, but as a matter of common sense, had you seen the Marchioness before Blackfriars, the suggestion is you clearly should have reported her back to the bridge. Do you now accept that?
Now I do, yeah.
Yes. All right. I want to move on to the subject of rescue. Now, there are 2 lifeboats on board the Bobel.
Yeah.
And the responsibility to launch those would be the captain's.
Yes, the skippers.
Yes. And how often had you done boat drills with them?
I can't really remember exactly how many.
No, I'm not asking for exact numbers or anything of that kind, but would a drill, for example, include lowering the boat all the way into the water and then practice of rowing it and so on?
Oh, no. I don't think we ever rowed a boat.
So they were never lowered into the water, tested for control or anything of that nature?
No. Not actually rowing them. No.
Okay, would this be fair then? That there was never any training for the crew of the Bobel about how to render assistance to other vessels in need?
No.
Were you aware personally of any other incidents that had occurred before the collision on this stretch of river?
Oh, yeah.
Right, and nobody within in the company had alerted you and said, now look, Mr. Blaney, this is a difficult stretch of the river. There's been some accidents here. There is potential for something serious happening.
No.
No, but if you had been warned of the serious risk of an accident of this kind, would that have made a difference to what you were doing on the forecastle on the night of the 20th?
Well, yeah, it would have been. I would have been keeping a proper lookout.
I see. One more topic, and it's back to alcohol, I'm afraid. And I want you to reflect just for a second. Do you think now, and looking back on it, it may well be with the benefit of hindsight, but it really generally is not desirable for members of a crew, when they're waiting to go on duty, to be drinking any amount at all?
Looking back on it, of course, but it wouldn't have made any difference at the time of the collision.
No further questions, my lord. Thank you.
Mr. Reader?
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Blaney, I want to ask you a question on behalf of Tidal Cruises, the owners of the Marchioness, just so I understand your evidence and so it is absolutely clear. On the night of the 20th, in the early hours of August 1989, there was no duty lookout posted forward on the Bobel.
No, we were forward, but not specifically to look at.
There was no duty lookout.
There was no dedicated lookout, no.
Can you tell me what the difference is, so that I can understand it, between keeping a lookout and looking about?
Well, if you're keeping a look at, you're reporting what you see to the British. But if you're just looking about, well, you're just looking about, aren't you?
Thank you.
Mr. Seligman?
I represent the crew of the Marchioness. Mr. Blaney, if someone had said you are lookout, what would you have understood your duty to have been?
To report all ships to the bridge.
What would be the best way to do this?
Well, you would need better communications, wouldn't you?
It was wholly impractical, wasn't it? The method of communication, shouting, used to report something ahead.
Well, I would say so, yeah.
Extract from the evidence of Robert Buckley, engineer's mate, on the dredger Bobel.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Buckley. Mr. Mansfield first?
Forgive me, my lord. Mr. Buckley, on the night of the 20th, after the collision of your vessel, the Bobel, it went on downriver, did it not?
Yeah.
Yes, and I want to deal with that particular period of time, because we'll come to a time when the ship is anchored and it's stopped before the police arrive. Do you follow?
I was down in the engine room. I never saw anything.
Yeah, I just want you to think for a moment. Do you know someone called Mr. Butcher? Did he come on board?
Mr. Butcher? Yeah. He did come on board. I did see him.
Yes. Did you see him?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and did you see or speak? Actually, I'll put it more particularly to you. Did you hear Mr. Butcher say anything?
Well, actually, no, I don't even remember seeing him.
Right. Have you ever indicated to anybody that Mr. Butcher bought some walkie-talkies on board the Bobel that night?
Me? No, not to my knowledge. I've never even seen a walkie-talkie.
Right. Would you just listen for just a moment? I want to ask you more about it. A question I'm going to suggest was put to you some years ago now along these lines. The question to you was, somebody from the company came on board, did they not? And you responded as follows.
Yeah, but I did not know who it was at the time.
Well, you may not have known who it was at the time, but later you knew it was Captain Butcher, didn't you?
Yeah.
And did you tell the person asking you, I'm going back again now, yes, Butcher came on board. He was there before the police. The person asked you, what did he say? And you said, he told us to say fuck all.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So just pause there for a moment. Now, did Butcher come on board and tell you all to say nothing and to keep your mouths shut?
Yeah.
Yes. And did he then say this? Did you then say this? I'm sorry. I know he brought 4 walkie-talkies on board because I saw him give one to each deckhand and one to the bridge.
That's what I got told to say, so I assumed it must be true.
Well, who told you to say that?
I don't know. Must have been one of the crew.
Are you sure that, in fact, it was not you that actually saw him bringing them on board? And this is how you were able to say to the person who asked you, but I know he brought 4 walkie-talkies on board.
I may have helped him on board, but I can't remember.
Well, I'll just try and remind you. You see, the reason that you know where this is coming from, you gave an interview, did you not, down the telephone to a television company?
Yeah, dispatches.
Yes, dispatches. And we've been provided with a transcript of what you told Callum McRae, the producer of that programme. Butcher, he went and got them. He bought 4 walkie-talkies, one for the bridge and one for the deckhand. Now, do you remember saying all this now?
Yeah, I suppose I must have done.
Yes, you must have done.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. No further questions, my lord.
From the evidence of Andrew McGowan, survivor and first mate on board the Marchioness.
In March of 1988, you were employed by Tidal Cruises as a crew member on passenger launches?
Yes.
You were an apprentice waterman. Did that permit you to act as a skipper on passenger launches?
The apprentice's license did within the jurisdiction of the PLA, yeah.
From the time you were employed until the collision with the Bow Bell on 20th of August 1989, did you receive any written instructions from Tidal Cruises as to your duties as crewman on passenger launches?
No.
Did either the directors of Tidal Cruises, Mr. Ludgrove or Mr. Dwan, give you oral instructions as to your duties?
No, that was the skipper.
Were you ever instructed by him that as a crewman you were to keep a lookout aft when you were not acting as the helmsman?
No, never.
When you were acting as helmsman, did you ever require the skipper to keep a good lookout aft?
No.
When acting as helmsman, did you consider you were able to keep a good lookout astern?
Yes.
How did you do that?
By using the roof hatch. Can I also add something here? The river is a series of meandering bends. You can actually see what is behind you for a great period of time by simply looking out of the windows. You look as often as necessary to maintain your situation of awareness.
Did you drink any alcohol that night on board the Marchioness?
No, I have never drunk alcohol while on duty or before going on duty.
Did you fetch any for Stephen Faldo that night?
Not that I can recall. I did on occasion bring drinks to the wheelhouse, but they were always non-alcoholic. Stephen would not have it any other way.
Can you recall how long you were adjacent or in the wheelhouse before the collision?
30 seconds to a minute.
Are you able to say Stephen Faldo did not alter the helm to port, or can you not remember what he did?
I can say 100% he did not turn the vessel to port.
Why is it you can be so sure?
Well, I could see ahead of me. Had he made a move to port, I would have seen Cannon Street Bridge move relative to me. He definitely did not turn to port.
I see. No further questions.
Mr. McGowan, I would like to ask you some questions about the hatch. What sort of height would you have to be to stick your head out?
As high as was necessary to see behind.
How tall was Stephen Faldo?
Probably about 5'6" or something. He was fairly short.
Did you have clear recollections of Stephen Faldo actually using the hatch?
I remember him using the hatch, yes.
Now, in practice, you spent more time in the passenger areas than you did beside the man who was conning in the wheelhouse.
Yes, Stephen Faldo would always want to make sure that there was somebody in the passenger accommodation keeping an eye on what was going on.
And were the owners of Tidal Cruises aware of your time in the passenger areas, making sure the boat was okay?
I suppose there were. It was only a small wheelhouse with one stool.
Now, turning to passenger numbers. Now, you have told us that you would not normally count passenger numbers on board the vessel.
You keep a mental note, but there was no system of ever recording the number. Priority is to ensure the boat was overloaded beyond its passenger certificate. I only recall one occasion where Stephen felt it was necessary to do a head count.
And what you had estimated there were, 100 to 110 on board?
Why?
Were you surprised to learn that there were, in fact, over 130?
I was, yes.
Now, you said that it was not unusual for passenger vessels to use the centre arches, but it was the exception rather than the rule.
You would follow the rule of the road. You would keep to the starboard side of the channel, but basically the centre arches in the centre of the river was not a forbidden zone. It was there to be used as and when necessary. Same as an overtaking lane on a motorway.
And when you were taking the centre, did you ever take any special precautions about looking aft?
You just check behind you, and equally you ensure there is nothing coming towards the centre arch.
So, as a matter of habit, you tended, before moving into the centre of the channel, to look aft.
Not even tended to, I always did.
And do you know what Mr. Faldo's practice was?
As far as I know, he was always a good waterman, and he always did as well.
Now, were there ever any safety announcements made on board or pointing out of emergency exits?
No. In hindsight, it is an excellent idea, but in those days, you would only ever come across a safety announcement on an airplane.
And did you ever receive any emergency training from Tidal Cruises or from Stephen Faldo in what to do in the case of an emergency?
Only on firefighting equipment and what have you.
Well, you are certainly owed great thanks for the efforts you made to save lives after the Marchioness turned over, which is much appreciated. Now, you mentioned in your statement that it felt as if the Bow Bell made a continuous contact with the Marchioness.
That is what I believe happened, yes.
So was it your impression that the Marchioness must have been carried
Yes.
forward down the river?
Yes. At the time, it was like your worst nightmare coming true.
How long did it take after this turning over to disappearing?
Actually turned over during the course of the impact.
Well, is that turning 90 degrees or turning turtle?
The way I remember, it was being pushed along. I don't know if you can follow what I'm doing with my hand here. As it was being pushed along, this is my impression of what happened. We were pushed by the stern for a distance, and then it started to pivot round from the pushing action of the Bow Bell. It rolled onto its right-hand side. That was when I was pushed into the water. I cannot say how far she went. She may have gone right over. I don't know.
Thank you. No further questions, my lord.
Mr. McGowan, you were asked about emergency information for passengers. Did you know that the department had issued an M notice in February 1988, recommending that persons such as tidal cruises should make pre-voyage announcements about emergency procedures?
I have no idea about it at all. No.
Mr. McGowan, I represent South Coast Shipping. From the time you joined Stephen Faldo at the wheelhouse until the time of collision took place, he did not, in fact, use the hatch to look astern, did he?
No, not after I joined him, no.
Mr. McGowan, on behalf of Port of London authorities, some questions about the VHF radio. You asserted that it was on all the time.
Yes.
On the night of the collision, you did not apparently hear it when you were on the pier, and you did not hear it at any time during the voyage. So how do you know it was actually on?
It was turned on at the beginning of the day, and it was turned off at the end. The radio was on. I have no doubt in my mind about it at all.
Well, once again, we are back to the situation that we have no idea why Mr. Faldo apparently did not take heed of the announcements on the radio, if it was turned on.
I do not personally believe he heard the Woolwich radio broadcast because I think it happened at the time of the collision. The only broadcast he would have heard, I believe, is the Waterloo Bridge outward bound position. The position was approaching Waterloo Bridge, and that is not a position report. That is a generalization.
He would have known at least, would he not, that the boat was coming down the stream? Well,
He should have done, yeah.
Can I ask one or two questions, please? When you surfaced, you saw Stephen near you?
Yes, I did. I saw him come to the surface.
Yes, I follow. You came to the surface a second or two ahead of him? He spoke to you, and then he disappeared, did he?
He said to me, "Get the life rafts, get the life rafts." And it was not that he disappeared, it was that I had other things to do then. I had no idea what happened to Stephen after that.
Yes, I follow. Thank you.
Mr. McGowan, after the police had picked you and other survivors up, you insisted on going back out with them on the launch to look for other survivors.
Yes, I did. But we didn't find anyone after that.
Thank you, Mr. McGowan. Let us have the next witness, please.
The evidence of William Ludgrove, Managing Director of Tidal Cruises, owners of the Marchioness.
Mr. Ludgrove, Tidal Cruises bought the Marchioness in 1979, and at that time, and at least until 1989, Tidal Cruises remained its owners.
Yes.
Prior to 1989, were there two directors, yourself and Mr. Dwan?
That is correct.
Was there any division of responsibility between yourself and Mr. Dwan?
Yes, Mr. Dwan was responsible for the safety and maintenance of the vessels and crewing and general operation. I was responsible for advertising, office booking, staffing, and so on.
Was that division of responsibility set out in writing anywhere?
No.
Did Tidal Cruises regularly monitor its crews or monitor the way they kept a lookout?
No, I don't think we did.
Do you now accept that you should have done?
Yes, we should have done more, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Ludgrove, now you were managing director of Tidal Cruises from what, 1979 to 1989?
Yes.
Do you think you had any role at all in ensuring the safe operation of the 5 vessels owned or operated by your company during that time?
Yes, of course.
See, I ask you that because, well, the impression you sought to give was that you effectively left all navigational operational matters to Mr. Dwan.
Well, that was his side of the business, but obviously I was involved in it.
Mr. Ludgrove, you made 3 conversions on the Marchioness. Now, can I suggest to you that when you carried out all these conversions, you were, or should, have been aware that the result was to create a problem with her visibility aft?
Well, I certainly was aware that there was not all-round vision from the wheelhouse, but neither was there in any other boat at that time that I worked on.
And was it your approach that so long as you could get the department to approve something, then that was okay?
Of course not.
Now, you said yesterday that it was always your intention to enclose the Marchioness.
Yes.
Well, why then did you send the department a plan which showed her unenclosed?
Well, I cannot say at this stage, but it was our intention to do it in stages, so I imagine that was the first part we were going to do.
Then did you recognize that you required department approval for whatever change?
Of course.
Chronology 00145. Having gone ahead and done the conversion without permission on the 6th of February, you wrote to the Marine Survey Office and said, I apologize for not requesting permission before carrying out these alterations, but at the time I had no idea this was necessary.
I have no recollection of that at all. As far as I know, I submitted plans which covered each part of the conversion.
Mr. Ludgrove, you put in a plan which showed an open vessel. You then converted the bar deck and made her accommodation totally enclosed, blocking off her aft visibility without permission. And then said you did not realize you had to ask for permission when you have just told us that you did not know you had to ask for permission.
Well, I obviously know now that I needed permission, but I have no memory of this, and I certainly have not seen the correspondence that you are referring to.
Well, you just have to look at this letter. Were you aware, firstly, of the collision between the Bow Trader and the Pride of Greenwich in July 1981?
I heard about it at the time, yes.
And you were aware, secondly, you have told us of a collision between the Bow Trader and the Hurlingham.
Yes, obviously.
Well, he must have been very concerned about it.
Yes.
It could have led to a very serious loss of life. Could you say yes rather than nod your head for the transcript?
Yes.
Thank you. Indeed, 22 people were injured in that accident, were they not?
Nobody was seriously injured.
You knew one of the problems arising from that collision was a question of her aft visibility.
Yes.
Well, it is clear, is it not, that there is a very serious problem with passenger vessels?
Yes.
Now, can we go to chronology 00370? It is a letter from the Federation of Passenger Vessels to Mr. Creever at the department. It is headed Thames Passenger Launches, Avoidance of Collision, Improvement of Helmsman Lookout Facilities. Now, there is reference to 2 collisions on the Thames during darkness which could have resulted in serious loss of life. I mean, you could have improved the visibility on the Marchioness. You could have raised the wheelhouse. You could have fitted an all-round pod. Why did you not take that option?
Because we obviously came to the conclusion that the two options we had, the side steps and the hatch, were the right solution at that time.
Now, it was certainly cheaper to simply fit a hatch.
Yes, but if you're suggesting that it was a financial consideration, I would not agree with you.
Now, could we go to chronology 500, where you asked for a meeting with Captain Clipsham about reducing the crew? Well, that was an operational matter, wasn't it, which you, not Mr. Dwan, was handling?
Yes.
Why was that?
I cannot really say at this stage.
Now, can we turn briefly to the Hurlingham in chronology 00442, which records an inspection by the department surveyor, Mr. McGaw. It records his view that arrangements for the lookout, surprisingly, were satisfactory. Well, presumably you breathed a sigh of relief.
I cannot remember, actually.
Well, it must have seemed curious to you that whereas one vessel had received a requirement for a pod, another had not.
It seems curious now.
And subsequently, you applied to reduce the crew from 3 to 2.
Yes.
Again, this was you dealing with an operational matter. I quote, "We were obviously anxious to reduce costs."
As I remember, we were simply following a trend. At that time, there were a number of vessels operating with 2 crew.
This was applying to reduce crew on a vessel which had been involved in a serious accident because of lack of visibility aft.
But there was no evidence that the number of crew was a factor in that incident. There were 3 crew on there on the night of the incident.
Maybe you should have had 4, Mr. Ludgrove.
Or maybe 6.
Can I just ask you one point about safety equipment? Now, you have told us that the ship on your note paper is the Hurlingham. Now, we see, do we not, a whole string of life buoys all down the side between the decks?
Yes.
Yes. And 3 in the front on the foredeck. Now, can we look at photograph 00443? Where have they all gone, Mr. Ludgrove?
I believe they have been replaced by other buoyancy apparatus.
Why were they not left on to float free in the event of another catastrophic accident?
They may have been on in a different form, or presumably on the roof.
No further questions, my lord.
Mr. Ludgrove, I should make it clear that Andrew McGowan, whom I represent, his criticisms of tidal cruises are formally withdrawn. The questions that I am going to be asking you are on behalf of Stephen Faldo through his widow, Deborah. With regards to Tidal Cruises Limited, you are a major shareholder, is that right?
Yes.
Between you and Mr. Dwan, would it be putting it simply that he runs the boats and you run the office?
Well, that would be the simplest way to put it, yes. There is an overlap.
You said this morning that you were surprised that with Mr. McGowan's evidence that he was not aware he was part of, in effect, the permanent system of lookout.
Yes.
Can I take you back to WIT 5967? The assumption in those statements is that you do not think it was an essential system that the second crew member be involved, describing it here as a temporary arrangement.
No, what I'm saying here is the hatch allowed the helmsman, if necessary, to keep his own lookout, but I would not recommend that as the permanent system.
In fact, this other crew member had a lot of other responsibilities. An important one was the engine, was it not?
It was, but generally once the party started, there was no need to go to the engine room unless something untoward happened.
The point was that with 2 crew members on the boat, it was a system that worked perfectly well as long as everything went swimmingly, but could not possibly cope with any kind of emergency.
No, I could not agree with that.
Another point mentioned earlier about the name of your company, that is that it is often referred to as Tidal Cruisers.
Yes, I know. It was a common mistake.
Yes. It was a bit of a casual of you to let your own letterhead misdescribe yourselves in that way.
If you say so.
Perhaps not only if I say so. Costs were always a problem, were they not?
No.
One that considered at the forefront of your mind.
Everyone thinks of cost, but they were not particularly a problem.
At the end of the letter at DETR 00082, this is your letter of complaint about having to carry out a second inclining test, although later you agree to it. You do, though, mention the urgency of your booking's schedule.
Yes.
Then at DETR 00064, this is you objecting to the third inclining test. Again, the last point you make in your letter, I therefore do not propose to spend any more money on this matter until I have received a satisfactory explanation on the points raised in the letter. The consistent theme is that safety comes second to financial requirements, or perhaps restrictions.
Oh, I think that's a bit of an over-exaggeration. I was only protested at the time because I did not think it was necessary.
But this was also the department that you said you had relied on to tell you if you are doing something unsafe.
That is correct.
Well, it is not, is it? You are actually being rather a difficult customer with the department.
The fact that I rely on them doesn't mean I have to agree to everything they say.
Well, in fact, on the third occasion, you get your own way. They do not carry out the test. The deal, if it is that you will restrict seating on the top deck to 38 passengers, fixed seating for 38 passengers.
Oh, that is correct, yes.
But is it right that the fixed seating was not for 38 at all? It was for something around half that number.
Well, I cannot remember, to be quite honest with you.
If you go to 5840 and scroll forward, in effect, 4 people around each table, 16 up to 20 people on fixed seating, you nothing like complied with the requirement, did you?
I cannot see where you were getting these people. There were 2 people on either side of each table.
I am sorry, but they are not on fixed seats. Those people are on movable chairs, and that is not what fixed seating means.
Well, I cannot explain it any further. I just don't know where you're coming from with this.
Mr. Seligman, I think we've grasped the point. Thank you.
No further questions, Millard.
I would like to ask you a question, Mr. Ludgrove. After the 1989 casualty, did you alter the crewing requirements for the vessels?
3 crew now for night cruises.
You may step down.
From the evidence of Annette Russell, survivor from the Marchioness.
Good morning, Ms. Russell.
Hello.
Now, you were a passenger on the Marchioness.
Yes.
Could I take you to paragraph 18 of your statement, 3062, and to the bottom of that paragraph, where you describe the Bow Bell was travelling up behind the Marchioness very quickly. I remember the Marchioness rocking from one side to another, rocking for a second time, and then I dived off the foredeck. Now, can you describe the rocking motion you experienced?
The wash in front of the Bow Bell had a rocking effect on the Marchioness. The people who were leaning against the edge of the boat on this side slid down, and then I dived off because I was conscious of what was about to happen to the Marchioness, and I had the opportunity to dive as opposed to fall.
And do you think you were the first person off the boat?
Oh, sorry, yes. I'm sure of that, yes.
You have described how you managed to swim to shore, to point X on the map. You had previously hung onto a rope.
Well, when I came up for the second time, because I was being taken by the undercurrent, I think I was taken more than once. I was having difficulty swimming, but I saw a tugboat with a rope alongside it, and that looked like security to me, so I swam to that. And the next conscious memory I have is somebody holding the rope out away from the boat so I could get to it. And then I stood up and I realized that the water was only up to to my waist, and I'd made it. There were 4 of us eventually on this patch of dry land.
Who was first ashore?
I don't know, but I took charge and I climbed up this 15-foot wall at the back.
Could I ask you to describe precisely what happened?
I went through this alleyway to the main embankment. Everywhere was silent. Everywhere was deserted. And then a car passed us on the road, and I flagged him down and asked the driver to take the 4 of us to hospital, which he did. Although he asked for £10 for taking us there.
And did you give him a £10 note?
Yes, a very soggy one.
Now, after the hospital, where did you go?
At first, it was just the 4 of us. Then eventually other survivors started to be brought in. We were there for an uncomfortable amount of time. But then we were taken by ambulances to what we were told was going to be the meeting point for everyone at the Savoy Hotel. We were all anticipating that we'd see other people we didn't know the whereabouts of. And then when we got there, it was just this empty room. No police, nothing. And I said to them, I think you must have taken us to the wrong place. And they left us there for a while, and then eventually they came back and said, oh, yeah, sorry, there's been a mistake. And then they took us to the Howard.
And what happened there?
Well, that was where we gave our first statements to the police. They soon realised that I knew quite a lot of people on the boat, so they were asking me about other things. I genuinely believe they didn't know the huge loss of life at that time. And I found out that there'd been another hospital involved, and I suggested it would be a good idea if lists of people's names from St Thomas's and the meeting points were exchanged. I mean, even just a while later, a friend of mine came to ask if I'd survived.
Now, when did you first arrive at the Howard and speak to the police?
Around 3, 4 in the morning. I can't remember, to be honest.
In your statement, you describe how, unfortunately, your parents were woken at 5 a.m. and told you were missing.
The police at the Howard had said that we ought to ring friends and family to let them know that we were okay, because this was likely to be on the morning news. So I thought I'd wait just until 7 a.m. when they'd just be waking up. Later, my father told me that the local police had been sent round my house at 5 in the morning. They'd woken my parents and my grandmother, who'd been staying there at the time, and told them that I was missing, presumed dead. And it was quite unnecessary for them to be disturbed in this way, because I was not.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. No further questions.
Miss Russell, I'm over here. On behalf of the department, I understand the collision happened very quickly, but if you had available to you on the foredeck a life jacket, do you think you would have tried to put it on?
No, I wouldn't have had time. I mean, I might have done if some had landed in the water.
I understand. Once you were in the river, you did not see life-saving equipment or buoyant apparatus?
Or rescue boats or anything.
Yes, thank you. No further questions.
From the evidence of Chief Superintendent Allen.
Mr. Allen. Afternoon. Mr. Allen, you spent 33 years in the Metropolitan Police Service, of which 28 years was spent in Thames Division.
Yes, sir.
Were you therefore the man in charge in 1989 at the time of the Marchioness disaster?
Yes, I was.
And to confirm the position at that time, you headed a team of 28 ranking officers and 95 constables, all working under you?
That is correct, sir. Yes.
On the night, there was some confusion initially as to the location of the incident.
Yes, the original report was the location of Battersea Bridge, but my recollection is that it was quickly clarified within a couple of minutes.
It is right that despite that fact, Thames Police launches 3 and 4 both left Wapping within a minute or so and headed straight for Callan Street?
Yes, I did.
Last question. So 4 boats were on the scene within approximately 10 minutes of the casualty, the first within 5 minutes.
Yes, that's right.
Mr. Allen, I represent the Marchioness contact group, and may I take this opportunity on their behalf to repeat what I said yesterday. to convey to you the gratitude of the families towards those officers who were able to do everything they could on the river to save lives that night.
Thank you very much, sir. That's very kind of you to say so.
Now, I just want to ask for your assistance in a few general areas, and the first is law enforcement on the river in 1989, and the other is search and rescue. Now, I think you have indicated that you played a supportive role to the PLA, the Port of London Authority, so far as offences being committed on the river of a navigational nature.
I would say so, yes. All Thames Division officers would be aware of the PLA bylaws.
So the question to you is this: at that time, was there a policy in this role for you to ever board vessels to check that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing?
We would not board to make specific checks, no, sir.
No consideration ever given to, say, boarding, for example, one of the Bow fleet while she was berthed at Nine Elms to check everything was in order?
No, sir, no consideration.
Did you consider saying to the Port of London Authority during your discussions with them, well, look, now you have the manpower to do this. We would not mind you keeping a check on things that are not obvious but are important, like lookout?
I can't recall discussing that specific point between myself and the PLA, no, sir.
Essentially, then, does it come to this, that before you retired, the situation on the river was that unless there was a breach of the law that could be, well, seen, blatantly disregarded, there was not really any random checks being made on the river. And I want you to understand very clearly, this is not a criticism of you or the police. I'm simply trying to ascertain the facts.
Not by the police, no, sir. Although the PLA or the Department of Transport may have been, as it was more in their remit.
Well, did the PLA have a vessel that could do this at any time of day or night in 1989?
They did have a prior to the Marchioness disaster, but at some point it was withdrawn, although I believe it was reintroduced after the incident.
Right. My next point, and I know this will not be taking you by surprise, is that the MAIB report concluded with regard to Rule 9, and for the benefit of everyone, that is the rule of keeping vessels to the starboard side of the channel, that its enforcement was widely ignored on the river.
I would not say it was widely ignored, sir. I would say it was occasionally ignored.
Well, just one of the things they indicated was that the warning letters that would be issued to offenders, and I quote here, despite these steps, the practice did not cease. Now, over 100 of these warning letters were issued between May 1987 and August 1989. So that's an average of nearly one a week. Now, that's not really occasional, is it?
Well, considering the amount of traffic on the river in a 24-hour period, 1 week, I would say, is not excessive.
So your view is, so I understand it, one person a week, that's not too bad, and that's what we would see as being occasional.
Yes, such a statistic never became that blatant in my view. They were dealt with a lot of the time by verbal warnings. Infringements would be people not keeping properly to the starboard side of the river and that sort of thing.
Well, can you recall, just roughly speaking, how many people did you have to report for lookout failures, for example?
I can't remember any specific incidents, but it was likely to have arisen when an accident occurred, in which case it would have become part of a report which I would forward to the Port of London Authority. Yes,
I do appreciate that they are the prosecuting authority. In the mid-1980s, the principal resource for rescue did, however, lay with the police, did it not?
By the very nature of police work, that is often the role we assume anywhere in London, sir.
Yes, and performing that role, did you or anyone ever consider that there was a real possibility that a collision between a disco boat and one of the Bow vessels was something that could happen at any moment? And you were alerted to that as a very real possibility.
There's always that risk, but when you consider an aspect like that, you'd have to look back over the river's history, and you'd have to go back 100 years to the Princess Alice. It was not as if a major disaster was a frequent occurrence on the river. You're certainly aware it's always a possibility.
In all the meetings that you had with you as head of Thames Division, was there any consideration given to the possibility of, well, increasing the number of craft on the River Thames that might be dedicated to the purpose of search and rescue?
I am sorry, I object to that, because the police had no vehicles or vessels dedicated to search and rescue. Question does not make sense.
All right, I will make sense for Mr. Thwaites. The position is, how many vessels on the river at that time, whether in your possession or someone else's, were there dedicated to search and rescue?
There was not really any vessels dedicated specifically for that task. I mean, take a police vessel. It's multifunctional.
Indeed, and well, we are all aware, and this is for Mr. Thwaites' benefit, there was a fire brigade vessel called the Storey, and that had more specific functions for search and rescue, did it not?
Yes.
Yes, so did you consider during the period of time we're concerned with, an increase of provision for dedicated rescue vessels? A simple question.
No, not dedicated vessels, sir.
No, okay. Thank you very much. No further questions, Brennan.
Mr. Allen, was there any system in place for ensuring that officers were constantly monitoring Channel 14?
Yes, sir, we did monitor Channel 14.
And since the collision, is it right that Thames Division has been reduced in size?
I believe it has, sir, but I'm not authorised to speak on events after my retirement in 1990.
Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Allen. I represent the crew of the Marchioness. On the subject of visibility, it is right, is it not, that at night a vessel like the Marchioness, looking aft, could not tell what length the vessel was that was approaching behind her, from the bow lights at least.
Well, if it did not have the second steaming light exhibited, then yes, that would be the case.
Is there any other way you are suggesting the Marchioness could have identified the length of what was approaching behind her by sight?
Well, another way would be by hearing the calls on Channel 14. Everybody would know a boat. It's a big boat.
Thank you.
Extract from the evidence of Captain James de Coverley, chairman of the original 1991 investigation into the collision by the Marine Accident Investigation Branch.
Here he comes, Dad. Captain to bloody cover up.
We've got no video, so you can come see it.
So, Terry's whole investigation was a whitewash.
Could I just say, in relation to Captain de Coverley, that this is not an inquiry into the MAIB investigation. The Secretary of State inclined to order such an inquiry. But of course, if Captain de Coverley has some primary evidence to give as to what happened while he was performing his duties earlier, then so be it.
Captain de Coverley, you became a nautical surveyor at headquarters in 1973, and you remained at headquarters until 1989. You joined the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, is that right?
More or less.
Thank you. You have made a very detailed statement about your knowledge and involvement prior to this sad collision, and I'm not going to ask you any questions. I will just tender you for cross-examination. Thank you.
Captain de Coverley, did you inspect the hull damage on the Marchioness after the collision?
I did.
Did you, when you saw this damage, form a view as to what had caused this damage?
Well, the opinion we had, looking at the nature of the damage as a whole, was that there was a slight damage aft, which had probably caused the vessel to pivot across the bow of the bow bell. The major damage was then done by the bow of the bow bell overriding the ship, turning her well over 90 degrees. And thus it was the bow of the bow bell that caused the damage.
Thank you very much.
Captain de Coverley, I have some questions for you on behalf of the Marchioness contact group. You were responsible for, among other things, for evaluating investigation reports and making recommendations.
Yes.
I want to consider with you the purposes of casualty investigation, and would you agree with this? That the principal purpose of casualty investigation is firstly to learn lessons for the future, and secondly to discover if there were breaches of rules or regulations that require prosecution.
I think the most important reason is certainly to find lessons for the future, but I think there are four aims. He has had He has to find out what happened. How did it happen? Why did it happen? And what should we do to stop it happening again? You may find some things in the course of the preliminary part of the investigation which will require some cautionary action with owners, harbour authorities, as well as with ship's personnel. It is an aspect of it really incidental to the main aim, I feel.
Finally, I am sure you are aware that families have been very concerned over the years as to why they had to wait so long for this public inquiry.
I am.
You are probably aware that some of them at least feel very strongly that you personally are responsible for obstructing a public inquiry into this tragedy.
Well, I am sorry to hear that. It is not true.
They are also concerned about the fact that you had meetings at 10 Downing Street, I think on more than one occasion, and they believe that a political decision was taken not to hold a public inquiry and that you were instructed from above to ensure that a public inquiry would not be held. Are you able to answer that question?
I am very happy to answer that question, though it is by no means the first time I have had to answer it. It is absolutely and completely false. I had one meeting with Mrs. Thatcher on the afternoon of the day of the accident. There was no decision taken at that meeting as to whether or not there should be a formal investigation. I was under no pressure whatsoever from Mrs. Thatcher, or, as he was then, Mr. Parkinson, the Secretary of State at the time, or any other persons in the government to carry out my inquiry in any way different from that which I wished it to be carried out. As to my influence, when we finalised our report, it is perfectly true that I recommend against a formal investigation for what at the time I thought were the right reasons. It was entirely my own decision.
Thank you.
I wish to be absolutely clearly understood, and I do hope I am not going to be asked this again.
Thank you, Captain de Coverley, for answering the question, and thank you, sir, for permitting Captain de Coverley to answer it.
Extract from the evidence of Ian Philpott, survivor from the Marchioness.
Mr. Meeson?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Philpott, you refer to a statement you made to the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, and that the declaration subsequently produced did not fully reflect what you had discussed with them.
That is correct. It did not contain all the facts that I had mentioned.
You have a great deal of experience of being on the water, in both boats at sea and on the river.
That is also correct. I was worried as soon as I boarded the Marchioness. I was aware that here were well over many people over 100. Maybe many of them had no knowledge of the water or how to take care of themselves. And I have to say, I do not think anybody on board was aware of any direct means of escape from the vessel.
Going back to your statement, at page 2866, you refer there to noticing that the water line was very close to the windows.
Yes, when we... first of all, I should point out it was a very warm night. We went down to the lowest dining saloon because it was less crowded down there. However, it was very hot down there, and Tamsin, who was my girlfriend at the time, opened one of the windows to let some fresh air in. I can remember quite vividly saying to her that if it was choppy, she would need to be careful about not being splashed, perhaps from the water of another boat.
Are you able to estimate what the distance was between the lower windsill and the water line?
When we set off, it was no more than 18 inches.
You also make mention of there being an emergency exit sign and signs on the windows. Were those signs clearly visible?
No, they were not.
What was it that first drew your attention to the fact that something was wrong?
We were still in the lower dining saloon and there was a slight jolt. And at first you don't think there was anything to it, but then the stern of the boat was starting to be pushed round, because I could see water building up on the side of the hull. And very, very shortly after the boat started being pushed, I can remember standing up and watching my pint of beer and cigarettes just slide across the table. I can remember looking towards Julian, and I realised at that point that it was quite serious. I just sort of nodded to him to take the girls up through the staircase, but as I looked across, it was already blocked. There was no means of escape from there.
Blocked with?
To my knowledge, chairs and a table. And then I looked back to the side of the boat, and there was just being pushed down into the water. The water was at this point just starting to come over, and within seconds of that, the lights went out and I was just hit by a wall of water.
Were you affected at all by the furniture?
Yes, I could not move from where I was at this time. I knew it was absolutely pointless to try and escape from the boat at that moment in time, well, until the water had settled.
At any time, did you notice anyone else trapped by furniture?
Everybody. Well, everybody was trapped in that part of the boat. I was one of only 2 people to escape from that part of the boat. I went out through the window. There was no other way out.
Once you were out and had surface, what did you notice in the water?
Lots of debris. I knew I would probably have not that much time of survival in that water. I was also shouting for Tammy. Then I saw an empty beer barrel and I grabbed hold of it.
Yes, Mr. Cooper?
I represent the Department of Transport, Environment and Regions. Do you think if you had time to grab a life jacket, you would have used it?
I would certainly have considered it.
Would it not have hindered your escape from the window?
That is a debatable point. It would have definitely depended on the style of the life jacket.
You also said in your statement that if the windows had been sealed, it would have taken a lot longer for the boat to go over. What I would like to do, if I may, is take you back. If the boat had been sealed, but the boat nevertheless has gone over, do you accept that you would have had a much more difficult time escaping from the vessel?
No, I disagree. If the furniture had still not been affixed, then I would not have got out, that is true. But if it was fixed and the windows were burst-proof, then you would have been able to go along the inside of the hull.
A sealed unit would require some form of mechanism to allow you to push and pull the window open. You would then be in the dark and underwater and have had to locate and operate the mechanism.
Well, I agree in principle to what you're saying, but if you had a vessel in which emergency lighting came on in an emergency, rather than being necessitated to be turned on from the bridge or the wheelhouse, it could be different. So your question is worded upon the basis that the boat be sealed with all the rest of the worst things still being present.
How good a swimmer were you at the time?
A very good swimmer, very fortunately.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honour.
From the evidence of Judy Wellington, mother of Simon Senior, taken from the non-statutory inquiry, 2001.
Sir, I understand a further witness would wish to give oral evidence today. She is Mrs. Judy Wellington, mother of one of the victims of the disaster, Simon Senior.
Yes, certainly. There's no objection to that at all.
I understand you wish to read that statement out?
Yes, I would.
I do not really mind if you read it out, although you will appreciate it. I can read it for myself.
I'm sure you can, but there's some things I'd like to say. When my son died, my daughter was just 13 days old. So my parents took over the process of liaising with DC Wallace. I submitted a recent photograph of my son, and we supplied them with dental records. One day I received a phone call from one of his friends who was actually on the boat to say that he went down to the mortuary and my son's name had appeared on the list. I then contacted DC Walsh. He said the body had not yet been recovered and we should only listen to him. Finally, when my son's body was recovered, we were told that they were 98% certain that the body was Simon's, but they would look at the dental records to be 100% certain. Once the body arrived back at the undertaker's, Mr. Wickenden informed us he had been given a white body.
Unbelievable.
Once this was finally resolved, after the funeral, I asked Mr. Wickenden, the undertaker, why they insisted that we could not see the body at any stage. Previously, we'd always been told that the body was in such a terrible condition, but he told us this was not the case. The body was not that visibly deteriorated. It was just that the hand had been removed. The point I want to make today is that, as you know, we as parents have had to wait a long time for today. I want to know, firstly, if we are going to receive an apology, and secondly, why his and 25 others had their hands removed in view of the fact that they had recent photographs and dental records. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, I think we will take a short break there and return in about 5 minutes. The next witness will be Dr. Paul Knapman.
Extracts from the evidence of Paul Knapman, the coroner, from the non-statutory inquiry given in 2001.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Knapman. Mr. Tier has some questions for you.
Dr. Knapman, thank you very much for the statements you've submitted and for coming today to give oral evidence. Before the Marchioness disaster, had you come across the practice of removing hands to enable fingerprinting to take place?
Yes.
Was it your understanding that such removal had to be authorized by you, the coroner?
Yes.
Had you ever refused permission for it to be done before?
Oh, yes.
Do you recollect telling Mr. Purchase, the senior police officer, that you had to be 100% sure of identification?
No, I do not.
Or do you have a recollection of telling him that you required both dental records and fingerprints?
No.
I see. Now, if you could look, please, at page 1811, it says, D.I. Raisin explained that the coroner wanted to have absolute 100% identification of the bodies before he would be satisfied. This means dental and fingerprint identification. Do you have any recollection of him stating that?
No, I think that is an overstatement by him.
On Tuesday, the 22nd, you opened inquests on 16 of the deceased. you anticipated that further bodies would be recovered from the river thereafter and would have to be identified.
Yes.
Now, it was on this day that you returned to your holiday in Devon. When you left, did you anticipate that some hands might have to be removed?
Oh, yes.
Did you leave any instructions as to the procedure to be followed in the event that a request to remove hands was made?
Well, I do not think I do not recall giving any procedure, but...
I see. Certainly. Yeah. Well, you left no instructions in writing.
Sadly.
On the Thursday and the Friday, the hands of 25 bodies were removed, and also a number of dental matches, 12 in fact, were made that day. Did you expect that hands would be removed where dental records were in the course of being obtained?
It all depends on how certain you are that dental records are being obtained.
In short, it is all a question of judgment, is it? I mean, having to regard for the circumstances at the moment, is it at the time the decision has been taken?
Well, yes, sir. It was a difficult and pressured situation.
On August the 24th, there is the post-mortem of Howard Dennis. On the body are found identity documents, national insurance card and student card showing Howard Dennis. On the next day, there is identification by his dental records. On the same day, we see that his hands were removed. In your opinion, would it have been appropriate to wait in this case before severing the hands?
Absolutely.
So, what went wrong in relation to Mr. Dennis?
Well, I thought that the people who made the decision, which is Mr. Raisin, were unaware that dental things were going on at the same time.
So, in order to ensure something like this does not happen, there ought, do you agree, to be a clear system of who is doing the collating?
Absolutely.
But you gave no guidance or instructions to that effect.
That is right.
You have stated that you were informed of the discovery of a pair of hands in a freezer sometime after the events of the Marchioness. Can you recall when this occurred?
I believe it was 1993. Well, it was certainly after 1992.
Mr. Thompson, another of the mortuary technicians, has given evidence that he recalled learning of this in 1989.
Sir, with respect, it is not really a question Dr. Knapman can answer.
Mr. Eastman, I think he can fairly be asked to comment on whether it might have been 1989.
Well, no. There is absolutely no chance. I mean, you know, if necessary, I could probably dig something out.
Your mortuary is so dirty, it takes people 4 years to find a pair of hands.
I am so sorry.
I am very sorry, but this needs to be asked.
Well, maybe, but I'm afraid that it's us that asks the questions.
For us, this inquiry. After 11 years, not for anybody else. It is for us. I am disgusted that it takes nearly 4 years to find a child's hands. You are nothing but a butcher.
Angela, come on. He's not worth your anger.
Now, this inquiry is in the public interest, and I would be obliged...
Yes, it is in the public interest, not to be deceived. I've come from New Zealand 9 times to hear this evidence from you.
If everybody could try and keep as calm as possible, I would obviously be grateful. Though I realise these are emotional matters we are dealing with. Mr. Tier, please continue.
Sorry, my lord. Dr. Knapman, what action did you take on learning this information?
Well, I was very angry 4 years after the event. I went away to think about it overnight. It was 1993. What do? You write a letter 4 years after the event, or go and see them and say, I'm awfully sorry, but we have a pair of hands. What do you want us to do with them? Or you can say, well, they've probably moved on and gotten over their grief, and it is well just to dispose of them.
What uncaring, cold bastard.
That man isn't capable of any feelings.
Did you give instructions to that effect?
Yes, I did.
In 1989, did you concern yourself with the mortuary system for ensuring the right body is delivered to the right undertaker?
Well, I did not know the detail. They had quite elaborate procedures for numbering and so on.
My suggestion to you is that you ought to concern yourself with it to satisfy yourself that it is a safe system.
Well, I accept that is ideal, yes.
And that the right hands are returned to the right body?
Absolutely.
Dr. Knappman.
No further questions.
Dr. Knappman, on that last point, I would like to ask a question. Would you think it desirable that there should be clear guidelines for coroners as to what their exact roles are, as well as for the police, the coroner's office, mortuary staff, indeed, everybody involved in the disaster? Should they know in advance what their roles should be?
Well, that would be very, very welcome, because everybody would know what their responsibility is.
Yes. Mr. Haddon Cave.
Mr. Knappman, is it always your intention to return back to your holiday?
Yes, I think it was.
Mr. Knappman, you chose to return from holiday to lay down ID criteria for all the victims, and then you left without briefing Dr. Dolman properly, without giving proper instructions to the police. Well, in those circumstances, I suggest to you that it was clearly wrong of you to return on holiday.
Whilst I accept that things could have certainly been handled better and more formally at the time, I have to say that I rather thought things were going satisfactorily.
Yeah. Now, your decision not to return the hands in 1993, to have the third pair of hands that was not returned to the body destroyed. Now, was that decision motivated in part by a desire to conceal from the public what had happened?
Oh, well, I reflected overnight on what had happened, and I'm sure that thought crossed my mind, but my main concern was not to cause any unnecessary distress.
No further questions, my lord.
Extract from the evidence of Cecil Creeber, Department of Transport.
Sir, the next witness is Mr. Creeber from the Department of Transport. Yes.
Mr. Creeber, much has been said about the vessels of the casualty in relation to Lookout and the use of VHF. Do you have any comment on either the powers of the responsibility of the department in that regard?
Well, yes, the responsibility for the jurisdiction of the river lies entirely with the PLA. It's not our business to control navigation on the Thames.
Can I ask you this? Do you consider that the department did what it reasonably could to prevent the collision between the Marchioness and the Bowbell?
I feel in 1983 we did everything within our power to prevent this accident from happening. It should not have happened.
Mr. Creeber, we can see that the department had various meetings with the owners of the passenger vessels on the river to discuss the problems.
Yes, we had two. The one in September 1983 and the other later for anyone who could not attend.
Yes. My question really is a different one. Did you ever have a meeting at which both passenger vessel operators and the owners of the bow vessels, for example, attended?
No.
Why not?
Well, I always thought that should be done through the PLA. But as you say, there would be a good reason for having the two together. But one of the things that bothered me was there might have been a fighting match between them.
I would like to ask you about M notices. What, as you saw it, was the purpose of an M notice?
Well, I'm pleased you asked me that question. The purpose of an M notice was to notify people from a safety point of view, but the value of the notices I rather question, because while they normally would be read by somebody, they would tend to get filed away somewhere.
Well, in what respects do you think they were actually a good idea?
It brings to people's notice of a particular problem, but the long-lasting effect, that's where the problem is.
But one of the purposes is to remind mariners and, indeed, owners of what they really should already know.
Absolutely.
What is the responsibility of the head or local office to distribute M notices to all shipping companies?
The headquarters issued them originally.
Do they keep a record of who they sent them to?
Well, I can't recall.
It would seem rather odd, would it not, simply to distribute these M notices without keeping any record of who you had sent them to?
I think in the London office there was a record kept, but I'm not sure.
Well, who decided which notices to send to which M notice to which class of ship owner?
It was normally dealt with by 3 senior surveyors.
We have seen a number of M notices giving advice to masters about lookout, but as far as I can see, none of them relate directly to passenger launches.
That's correct. None of them quote passenger launches directly.
It seems possible then that those notices would not have been sent to the passenger launches?
Yes, that is possible.
Extract from the evidence of Robert Samuel, chairman of South Coast Shipping, owners of the Bowbell.
Mr. Samuel, as chairman, you had some knowledge of the merger between South Coast Shipping and East Coast Aggregates. This was when your company acquired the fleet of the Bow ships. In your statement in paragraph 54 on page 5518, you say there was an assessment of the strength and weakness of the Bow fleet. And from this assessment, it was soon apparent that the performance of the ECA vessels and some of their crew was not of the same standard as in the SCS vessels. Those differences reflected on the management standards of East Coast Aggregates?
In some respects, yes.
Did you consider, as director and general manager, having taken over the management of the Bow vessels, to inquire into the navigational practices employed on these vessels?
Not immediately, no.
Well, did you ever learn from Mr. Butcher prior to August 1989 that there were any problems on the Bow vessels concerning navigation through the bridges?
Unfortunately, Captain Butcher did not inform the management team or the directors of any problems, to my knowledge, before the incident.
There they go again, blaming the dead.
Turning to chronology 727, this is a minute of a meeting held with yourself as chairman. A number of ship's masters from both companies were present. Now, the first item is headed safety. Looking at these notes, there was no discussion of navigational practices on the Bow vessels through the bridges?
If there was no note to that effect, then, well, there was no discussion.
On page 1314, there is a document beginning South Coast Shipping Limited standing orders. If you look at the second paragraph, it reads, whenever a vessel is navigating through a bridge or in any particularly confined waters where close quarters or hazardous situation may develop quickly, in addition to the watchkeeping officer on the bridge, an officer and an able seaman must be posted forward as lookouts. Was this a standing order that was drafted after the collision with the Marchioness?
Well, I cannot be certain. In the form we are looking at now, they may well have been amended following the incident.
I see. No further questions.
Mr. Samuel, I represent the Marchioness contact group, and the first question I want to ask you arises out of something that you said earlier. That is, that you regarded yourself as the person designated ashore with responsibility for monitoring technical and safety aspects of the company.
Yes, that is what I said earlier.
Yes, so you were. Subsequently, then, you would have been concerned about safe navigation on the River Thames. Ultimately, that respect came within your remit?
Yes.
Yes, so I want to suggest to you very clearly, on behalf of the group that I represent, that you seriously and substantially neglected that duty, did you not?
No.
So let us move on to 1988 and the merger. Still being the person responsible ashore, you would have had to have been aware of the problems that were above Tower Bridge, because at the time you had vessels plying that stretch of the river.
Well, as I've said before, I was relying on my heads of department who were well qualified in that aspect of the business.
Well, let me put it another way. Do you have an inquiring mind?
I think the evidence before the court will demonstrate that I do have an inquiring mind, yes.
Right, so you do not wait to be told. You must, if things go wrong, ask questions about any given situation. Do you agree?
I do.
Well, did you know by the time of the merger at least this, that there had been a collision between two bow vessels on the river in November 1987, one of which was the Bow Bell? Did you know that?
Well, yes, I did. And I clearly made reference to that in my statement.
So you did know that?
Yes.
Just on the basis of this one incident, being the man ashore, did you ask any questions about it?
Yes, I'm sure I did.
Well, what is the answer?
I cannot recall.
I appreciate we are now some distance away, but I'm going to suggest to you that you must have been thinking long and hard after August 1989 onward about how it could possibly be that you were so ignorant of everything.
We were never advised of the problems by Captain Butcher. Never. The meetings that I had regularly with the masters, they did not record any difficulties in navigating up the River Thames. I have no information from the Department of Transport or the PLA of any difficulties that our vessels were experiencing. None.
So basically it's everyone else's fault save yours, is it?
No, it's not. The record will show that if I had been aware, I would have done something about it.
Well, Mr. Butcher had an office in the same building as yours, did he not?
Yes, he did.
You would see him pretty regularly?
Yes, I did, yes.
A lot of contact with Mr. Butcher. So are you suggesting then that Butcher, in particular, never said a word to you, ever, about the continuing ongoing problems that the River Thames posed?
As I've said, that is my recollection, yes.
Not a single word. You see, I know that he's not here to ask because when he was alive, I mean, did you ever ask after the Marchioness, look here, why did you not tell me?
I cannot remember. It's more likely that I did.
Yes, quite. So what did Butcher tell you when you asked it?
Well, for the same reason that I specifically remember, I cannot specifically remember the conversation. I equally cannot specifically remember the response.
Well, Mr. Samuel, this, I will put it to you bluntly, is the kernel of why there needs to be a public inquiry to find out how it is that on a river in the middle of London, one vessel does not see another. Yours, the Bow Bell, is another. Now, are you honestly saying, basically, well, it's not really my responsibility, but it actually is my responsibility, but it's not really my fault because I did not know all about the difficulties? Is that your final answer? You can't give us a clue?
I can't give you a specific response, no.
Well, give us any response you like.
Well, that would be not the thing to do.
All right. You see, I'm going to suggest it was not just a lack of communication with you, but a lack of inquiry by you. Besides the incidents in 87 and 88 in February, the Bow Bell on this same stretch of river struck Southwark Bridge. Did you know about that?
Well, I would at the time.
Yes, and I would suggest to you that if you had, it would have caused your inquiring mind to say, wait a minute, we have two vessels here, which I'm responsible for, colliding in November, now February. There must be something wrong here. Did that simple question occur to you?
No, because a vessel striking a bridge or a wharf happens all the time.
I see. In December 88, and it's not on the river, the Bow Sprite, also in your fleet, goes down with loss of life off the coast of Belgium.
Yes.
So now we have, at least within your knowledge, 3 incidents affecting the Bow fleet. In fact, the summary of the position is that between 1981 and 1989, there were 9 other incidents involving the Bow fleet. 9 collisions with either passenger vessels, bridges, or both.
As I have said several times this morning, I have no knowledge of the previous incidents. I was not a general manager of the shipping company at the time, so it is not my remit.
No, and I'm not suggesting that in 1981 you necessarily knew, but in 1988, during the merger, you do a review when you take on this fleet of Bow ships. Now, at that time, did you discover that there'd been a collision between the Bow Trader and the Hurlingham?
No.
In 1982, it was alleged that the Bow Trader damaged a vessel by going too fast down this stretch of river. Did you know about that?
No.
Also in 82, the Bow Bell hit scaffolding on Cannon Street Bridge. And in the same year again, Southwark Bridge, the one we're concerned with, in fact, today, she nearly collided with another passenger vessel, the Eltham. Then we have the Bow Trader colliding with the vessel, the Caption, in the Upper Pool. And in 1983, the Bow Bell again colliding with the Pride of Greenwich. Now, did your inquiring mind know about any of those?
No, as I've said, no.
Can we have up WIT 05518? This is a document, as you put it, of assessment of the standard of the Bow vessels. The management team at SCS consider the strengths and weaknesses of the Bow fleet. Now, the management team contains, apart from yourself, among other people, Captain Butcher, Mr. Butcher, the operations manager.
Yes.
Right. So, look, I'm going to suggest to you straight away. So, I mean, it's absolutely inconceivable, isn't it, that if Butcher is part of the team reviewing the vessels, that he did not say to you, now, hang on a minute, Mr. Samuel, we've had a bit of a problem the past 9 years on this stretch of the river about which you know nothing. I mean, it's inconceivable, isn't it?
What is inconceivable?
He did not tell you about this at the time.
Well, that was the situation.
Well, reading this report further down, and I quote, it was soon apparent that the performance of the East Coast aggregate vessels and their crews were not of the same standard as South Coast shipping. Well, what exactly was apparent about them?
Well, they were continually breaking down and therefore their productivity was much less.
Exactly. Your concern, Mr. Samuel, was the utilisation of the craft to ensure maximum profit.
That's not the case.
Well, this company became a fully owned subsidiary of Ready Mix Concrete in 1983, did it not?
Yes, I believe so.
And they had a safety policy, and in fact, they had a group safety department.
Yes.
And would it be correct to say throughout all of those years of these many collisions, Ready Mix Concrete would have been aware of those collisions, would they not?
Through what means? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, they are a company which wholly owns from 1983 another company which is having a lot of trouble, to put it mildly, on the river. I mean, RMC must have known between 83 and 88 that trouble in navigational terms was being had with their fleet on the River Thames, must they not?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Not a single member of the RMC safety group told you, and listen, I'm putting this in colloquial terms here, just to see if it triggers any memories. Mr. Samuel, I'm sorry, but we're handing you something of a poison chalice here. We've had all these problems in the past. Perhaps you can sort them out for us.
No, not in terms of navigation, no.
Well, you were the designated person ashore, so I mean, that alone is a serious dereliction of duty by them, is it not?
If you're referring to the safety department, that would be not my responsibility for advising on these problems.
Who is in 1988?
Captain Butcher. Captain Butcher. Unfortunately, in 1998, Captain Butcher did not advise.
Yes, so you say it is him. Well, did you know how he regarded his job? Because he does state in his own statement that marine safety is in fact the responsibility of Captain Darwell.
Well, whatever he says in another paragraph, he states in paragraph 79 that he is responsible for the safe navigation of the fleet.
Well, look, I'm not going to argue with you about the interpretation,
Good.
Especially as he cannot be here.
This is ridiculous.
Looking at another particular document you drafted on PR crisis management in June 88, it is core 373 for my learned colleagues in the room, and I quote, "The potential danger of a serious incident occurring involving in some way the general public and therefore extensive media coverage is high. This could result from perhaps a major collision with another vessel or danger to the general public, to list but a few." Then you're dealing with some media coverage and so on. Do you recall that meeting?
Yes, this was specifically to deal with crisis management.
And who comprised of this crisis management team?
Probably myself as chairman and most of the department heads.
And Mr. Butcher, again, involved in this all?
Yes, I imagine so, yes.
You imagine so. Once again, I'm going to suggest to you, he would have said in this crisis team meeting, you know what, you're absolutely spot on here because we have precisely this difficulty up and down the river. It could happen any day. Are you still really telling us that he did not breathe a single word of it to you?
That's what I'm saying, yes.
I want to move on.
Yes!
I heard you. Thank you, Mr. Samuel. I want to move on to the employment of Captain Henderson, whom you appointed as master of the Bow Bell. Are work references normally checked?
Normally, yes.
Were you aware that Captain Henderson had deceived you about his past?
I did not know anything about that until this inquiry, no.
Certainly after the events of the collision, there were difficulties with him. He had to be flown back, I think it was from Amsterdam, again, the allegation that he'd been drinking, and also in Shoreham Harbour. A collision, in fact, again, January of 1990.
Yeah.
In fact, there comes a time when you weren't sure what to do with him. You want to avoid Henderson going public, going to the press.
Sorry, I don't understand. I cannot follow what your line is thinking.
Okay, well, let me see if I can remember you. In March 1994, you had a discussions with Mr. Stevens about providing Henderson with a financial package of £20,000, did you not?
Yes, I had a discussion about the, yeah.
Yes, you wanted, 1, to avoid Henderson going to the press. 2, you wanted to avoid any pressure for there to be a public inquiry.
I'd suggest that if we had a public inquiry 10 years ago, a lot of the answers to the questions you've been asking would have been a lot clearer.
Mr. Samuel, that we certainly do all accept in this room, but sadly it was not the case. If it had happened before, I'm sure we would have all benefited. Now look, going back to the night in question, in 1989, the majority of the crew went ashore. Henderson claims he had 6 pints. Blaney, the lookabout, says he had 8. Mr. Westcott, the cook, he was so drunk, he spent the entire time down below, sleeping it off as soon as he got on board. Did you know that?
I do not think it had been demonstrated that he was in that state, but I agree that the evidence suggests that, yes, they had been drinking.
So that's 3 members of a 9-man crew. Now look, do you agree, therefore, that the company's monitoring of behaviour and alcohol consumption was lax?
Yes. In respect of that particular crew, yes.
Yes. Now I want to deal with the installation or intended installation of an integrated communication system on the Bow Bell. Now, you were shown some initial requests for the need for it starting in July of 1998. Could we have up core 00378, please? Thank you very much. Under paragraph 38, you'll see here supply and fit, including communications between the forecastle, head and wheelhouse of the Bow Bell. Yet it comes out of dry dock, as I'm sure you know, without a system being fitted. Why was that?
There was a system, a legitimate system, and we compiled with that at the with that regulations at the time.
Well, let us deal with that. Did anyone consider it would be unsafe for this vessel to be plying the River Thames without an effective communication system between the forecastle and the bridge?
It was not unsafe because there was adequate communications by virtue of the walkie-talkies that were on board the ship at the time.
Yes, but did you know that the walkie-talkies that were on the Bow Bell were generally not used as a matter of course?
The evidence before the court suggests that different masters of different ships had different practices. That's...
Yes, but I mean, that in itself is not an entirely... That's entirely unsatisfactory, is it not, Mr. Samuel?
Well, what, the various masters had different systems?
Yes, one of which purely relied on shouting.
Well, I did not know that before the incident that happened.
It is unsatisfactory, is it not?
Yes, it is unsatisfactory. It is.
Right, yes, okay. So we know that the integrated communication system was not fitted before the collision, was it?
No, that is true.
Yet, coincidentally, it was fitted right less than a week after the collision. Can you explain how it took so long from July 88 to August of 89 and why it took over a year to fit?
No, I cannot give an explanation, no.
Did your inquiring mind investigate as to the cause of the delay after the collision?
Yes.
What was the answer?
I would like to repeat again that there was no legal requirement to have a fixed link system between the bridge and the focal head.
No, Mr. Samuel. I'm sorry to persist on this matter, but did you actually hear my question?
Yes.
Yes. So what was the reason for the delay?
11 years after the event, I cannot specifically say what.
Mr. Samuel, you haven't come here today to give evidence on the basis of things that you can't remember, have you?
No, if I remember anything specifically, I would explain it to you.
You use the word specifically, but I think the answer is that you have no reasons to offer of any kind, do you?
I cannot help this inquiry.
No. Did you know there was no system of lookout operating on the Bow Bell?
The evidence suggests there was a system of lookout on the Bow Bell.
Does it? Can I just summarise it for you? Captain Henderson said he didn't know who was the lookout that night. Mr. Blaney said he was not the lookout that night. He
Untrue.
was the lookabout.
Untrue.
The next person on the forecastle said he certainly wasn't the lookout, but he thought that Blaney was. Is that a system, Mr. Samuel?
One would expect justifiably that a master mariner would be able to comprehensively understand what he needed to comply with the relevant regulations in respect of the lookouts on a vessel.
Do you now, Mr. Samuel, looking back on it all, have any regrets?
In what respect?
Well, about this collision and how it came about.
Well, that's an obvious question. The obvious answer is, of course. Of course. We all regret it.
And what would you change, looking back on it all now?
It's not so much what we would change. It's what we did change.
Yes, but you only changed it because of the collision, did you not?
Indeed.
Yes. No further questions, Miller.
Mr. Samuel, just one question. I'm looking at the layout chart of the company. You say Mr. Butcher was in charge of navigational safety, but Mr. Darwell was the safety officer. Why is it then that Mr. Darwell reports directly, according to this, to Mr. Stokes, who is the head of sales and marketing, and not to Mr. Butcher?
Because I felt that was the right decision at the time.
But if Mr. Darwell has the safety matter that affects Mr. Butcher, he has to go through Mr. Stokes. Surely this could result in a breakdown of communication, could it not?
I can only repeat what I've already said.
Yes, well, thank you for coming, Mr. Samuel. Perhaps we can have the next witness.
Extract from the evidence of Julius Stevens, manager of the group safety department for ready mixed concrete.
Yes, that's correct. The next witness is Mr. Julius Stevens. Mr. Stevens, you were the manager of the group safety department from 1985 until at least the collision between the Bow Bell and the Marchioness?
Yeah, I was, yeah.
You were an employee of which company?
I was an employee of RMC Group Services, which was a service company for central departments.
Were you a director of any RMC company?
No, I was not.
Were the vessels owned by the two subsidiary companies of RMC, which in turn own the ships, inspected or visited by personnel from your department?
Yes, they were.
And for what was the purpose?
Well, the department at the time was an advisory department designed to give advice on the sort of generic health and safety matters that were covered across a wide range of companies. paying particular attention to the policy procedures. Did they have training? Did they monitor standards? Did it report accidents? These were basic general things that would apply in all companies, whether they were shipping companies or not.
And were the persons who inspected the ships knowledgeable of ships and shipping?
Or at the time we're talking about, no, they were not. We did not have any specialists in the area.
Would a collision involving a bow ship be a safety problem which should be brought to your attention?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
If collisions involving bow ships had been brought to your attention before 1989, what, if anything, would your department have done about it?
Well, I think there would have been very little that we as a department could have done about it, since we did not have the expertise in the particular area.
I see. No further questions.
Mr. Stevens, I represent the Marchioness Action Group. Now, could we look at the RMC Group safety policy? The first paragraph of the mission statement reads, "The policy is to maintain the highest standard for the safety and health of all the group's employees and conduct safeguards against the exposure of the general public to risks to their safety and health."
Yeah, I think that was exactly as you phrased it, to show that these were prime policy matters for both employees and the general public.
Well, it is a long document, about 150 pages. Now, apart from the one page on marine matters referred to earlier, there are no other sections that refer to marine matters.
No, there is not.
I mean, this document was prepared in 1977. As far as we can tell, none of it seems to relate at all to anything other than effectively employee safety. I mean, is that fair?
Well, I cannot recall all of the 150 pages, but I think your general drift is right. I think it was typical of company safety policies at the time.
Well, it is rather one lonely page in a very long document. No further questions, my lord.
Mr. Stevens, I'm over here. As I'm sure you know by now, I represent the Marchioness Contact Group. Now, can I just summarise the position from the answers you've given so I have this clearly? That's by the 1st of August 1985, you personally had no experience in safety management. Is that correct?
Correct.
No knowledge, no training in safety management?
Correct.
I have perhaps a simple question for you then. Why did you become the manager of the group safety department?
Because I was appointed and asked to do it.
Yes, but did it not occur to you to say for one moment, hang on a minute here, I'm not really sure I'm qualified or competent to do this job?
Oh, it not only occurred to me, I did say it to Tony Jessup, who appointed me.
Well, what did Mr. Jessup say?
Well, what he said was, what the department needed was management experience. It needed to be brought back into a relationship with line management in the group, and that is what I set out to achieve.
Yes, however, you achieved nothing as far as navigational safety for the public was concerned, did you?
Well, absolutely nothing, no. It was not part of our remit to do so.
Well, I will come to that remit in a moment. When you took on this post, did you make your first task to do a review of the history of the safety records and how they were managed by the various groups of company in the RMC group in 1985?
No, I did not carry out a detailed review. I was more concerned about where we were going forward rather than back.
Yes, but you cannot go forward, as they often say, unless you know where you have been in the past. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so, I mean, you would want to be able to monitor the ship's companies from the centre, as it were. You'd want to make sure they were doing their job. That's why your department is in existence, is it not?
Well, no, that is not why we are in existence.
Oh, I see. What did you think the reason for your existence was then?
Well, the safety department was there to advise and to support, but it was not an expert in all of the many different specialist areas within the group.
Yes, but you cannot advise if you don't know, can you?
Well, I am not sure that is true. we would assist people to see where they could get advice from.
You did not make any attempt in the years before 1989 to get any advice from anyone else on navigational safety, did you?
Oh, I was not aware there was a problem on navigational safety.
So you say. How often did you have contact with the company director, Mr. Ormsby?
Well, I would see him from time to time.
Mr. Butcher?
Yeah, after the merger with SCS.
Mr. Samuel?
I had regular contact with him.
You see, he thought, because he did not know, that RMC Group Safety Department would have known about the problems on the river. But he's wrong, is he?
Absolutely wrong.
As far as you're concerned, who was the designated safety officer for SCS?
Well, my understanding was that it was Brian Darwell.
Your understanding was that it was neither Mr. Samuel nor Mr. Butcher?
That's correct.
But Mr. Darwell never speaks to you about any problems on the river, does he?
No, he didn't.
Just so I'm clear, the total picture from 1985 start to the finish, well, of 89, is up until the collision, not a whisper of anything on the front in relation to the problems on the river to you.
Correct.
Moving on along then to other reprehensible matters. The disciplinary proceedings in relation to Captain Henderson. Was he dismissed?
No, he was not.
You were concerned about Henderson going to the press, were you not?
Well, I suppose so, yeah.
Were you striving to avoid any possibility of a public inquiry such as this one that might expose ready-mixed concrete?
No, I was not.
Well, we have here a document, and I do not intend to read it all, but you're welcome to have a look at it if you wish, and it follows his disciplinary hearing, Captain Henderson's, and then you are discussing with Mr. Samuel options of what to do with Henderson, and I quote, "What should we do with him?" You mentioned termination, redundancy in the press and so on. And then the next paragraph says, the primary consideration is the potential danger mentioned above of him selling his story having been terminated by us, which might have the effect of creating renewed publicity in the Marchioness, and the possibility of him saying something which would add to the case for a public inquiry. I have spoken to Bob Samuel about this.
Yes.
So why were you so concerned that anything he said might add to the case for a public inquiry? Were you opposed to any such possibility?
I am not particularly opposed to any such possibility personally. I was talking about advising my boss as to a situation.
Right, but why would you or your boss be concerned about the possibility of a public inquiry?
No, I am merely saying that some people were opposed to a public inquiry and some were not.
Right. Well, who were the people in the company that were opposed to it?
I cannot remember in detail. I am saying, well, look, it was the view.
Well, the reason for these questions, Mr. Stevens, is this: that the opposition within RMC to a public inquiry was that you knew within the company that you had failed because you did know there was a problem on the river and you had done virtually nothing about it. Do you understand the reason?
Yes.
Right. So what is your answer?
No, that is absolutely not right. I think the reason that some people did not want a public inquiry was because the matter had already gone over several times in the public, and a public inquiry would simply extend the issue and involve the company further cost.
I see. No further questions, my lord. Thank you.
Mr. Stevens, one is bound to say, looking at the procedure guide for safety, the impression is that it was drafted by somebody who did not have the faintest idea of what was involved in operating a ship.
I'm sure that is true.
It is just a safety guide, general in nature, and in some areas, such as quarries, it goes into some more detail.
Yeah, it was unbalanced with detail in some areas and washing over the top in others, but that is why the document was consigned to the dustbin a long time ago.
At the time you joined, and indeed after, how was the operating company to know what the role of the group safety department was?
Well, when I joined, they had been written to by my predecessor in the previous 6 months, outlining what their responsibilities were.
Looking at that, it might be thought that a master or any responsible ship's officer ought to not drink 6 pints and then rejoin the ship. I dare say you'd agree with that on principle, would you?
I do, yeah.
It might be thought that it is or should be a ship owner's responsibility, not just to have a policy on that, but enforce it in some way. And it might be thought the best way to do this would be by some kind of effective spot check.
I think it likely that would be the most effective way, yeah.
It might be thought that the employers could simply provide a contract of employment and contractual obligation to submit to random breathalyzer checks, for example.
Yeah, for new employees, that would present no problem.
Would RMC, so far as you're aware, support such a policy in the future?
Absolutely.
Extract from the evidence of John Ormsby, Chairman and Regional Director of Ready Mixed Concrete UK.
Mr. Ormsby, I want to make it clear to you from the outset that I suggest that there has been, by you and others within this group, namely Ready Mixed Concrete, a serious dereliction of duty with regard to safe navigation of the River Thames and your responsibilities. Do you follow that?
I follow that, yes.
Do you feel, looking back on it all now, that you were seriously lax in the way safety was enforced on your shipping fleet?
I think the mistake we made was employing Captain Henderson.
Well, I want to suggest to you that it goes beyond Captain Henderson. Did you think there was anything wrong with the bow vessels themselves being on the River Thames?
Well, they had restricted vision, yes.
Yes, and who was involved at the RMC level, your level, in safe navigational policies?
Well, no one outside of South Coast shipping or East Coast aggregates.
Right, so you are saying no one at your level had any interest in policies to do with safe navigation?
Well, we employed people who were well qualified to carry out that situation. I mean, I can't drive a HGV truck, but we've got plenty of them.
Yes. Between 83 and 88, you wholly own East Coast Aggregates. Now, who was the safety officer for the company at that time?
Peter Butcher.
And from 88 onwards after the merger with SCS?
I would say it was Captain Darwell. He was presenting me with safety reports at meetings and so forth.
Was it Samuel also?
Well, Samuel says it was Samuel, but in my opinion, 2 heads are better than one. And we had Brian Darwell and Peter Butcher, who worked very well together, and all the safety matters adequately covered.
Did you? Well, we have a multitude of documents about group safety from RMC, and well, as far as I can see, not a single one of them touching upon ship navigation.
I don't think there were any.
That's another undesirable situation, is it not?
No, I thought it was adequately covered within the company.
Well, how about regulating the bow vessels? Now, I'll try and be a bit realistic about this so that perhaps they only go through the centre arches of the River Thames at certain times of day and then not at night at all.
I think banning the passenger vessels from the central arches would have been easier. If they were not in the centre arches, there would not have been a problem.
I see. Was that the approach of your fleet? Get them out of the centre arches, we get the river as a fairway for our vessels, and then anything that happens is their fault. Was that the approach?
Nothing would have happened if they were not there. There was just no accident. There would have been no accident, yeah.
Well, banned or not, there may be all sorts of reasons why a pleasure craft has to use the centre arches. One of them would be, well, taking over another vessel, for example.
But that is why we... well, the bow vessels broadcast their position every 10 minutes or so.
Yes, and what I'm going to suggest to you happened on the night of the 20th was we put out a broadcast, we are coming, and then let's go for it, guys. That's exactly what Captain Henderson did. Now, do you accept that there has been a serious lapse by you at your level in overseeing policies?
No, I felt any monitoring had to be done within the company.
Yes, but as regional director, how did you know it was being done?
Well, only by what I was being told. We would have monthly meetings, management meetings, where things like this would be discussed.
Yes, but we know now that not a single document exists of these meetings, who said what and so on.
Well, not anymore, no.
No. On that subject, when you retired in 1995, were documents shredded, were they?
Correct, yes.
And were you aware at the end of that year that the Director of Public Prosecutions was considering the papers following a verdict by the inquest jury of unlawful killing?
No.
But you knew that there had been an inquest into the collision and all the events surrounding it, but you're telling me that you don't remember the result that the jury returned?
I cannot remember now.
Well, unlawful killing, I say it again in case you forget in 2 minutes. I suggest it was a significant verdict which could have had serious ramifications for you. Now, do you really tell me you were not aware of that possibility at all?
No, I did not say that, no.
Oh, so you were aware. Why then shred the papers of the meetings?
They would be shredded when I ran out the room. Nothing to do with me retiring as such.
I see. Shredded when you run out of room. Yes. Thank you very much. No further questions, Mark.
Mr. Ormsby, could you clarify for me the distinction between deck safety and navigational safety?
Deck safety refers to safety of items, rails, equipment, and anything on board the ship.
So before the merger, Butcher covers both. Then after the merger, Darwell was responsible for
more day-to-day things, but I still think, excluding navigation, Butcher still covers this after the merger.
So there we have three people then, do it. We have Captain Butcher for navigation, Darwell for what you call deck safety, and someone else for engineering matters or maintenance.
Yes, but they would work, well together. I know they
That
would.
is not quite what you told us earlier. Are you really guessing?
Well, I was always, left these
I
decisions.
may have been mistaken, but I got the impression that after the merger, Captain Darwell took over navigational safety.
Well, Captain Darwell was the person who brought everything together and presented the reports. He became the designated person after the recommendation of the MAP report.
Who had formulated the policy from those reports?
Well, Mr. Samuel.
I see. Thank you very much for coming, Mr. Ormsby.
Extract from the evidence of witness Stefano, passenger on the Hurlingham.
Mr. Stefano, you were on board the Hurlingham attending a friend's party?
Yeah, it was actually a fundraising event for my friend's widow.
You saw the Bow Bell go past your vessel?
Yeah, I did.
You describe in your statement that it was heading towards Southwark Bridge. Can you recall which arch they were headed for?
It was the centre arch.
Was the Bow Bell behind the Marchioness?
Yeah, at first the Bow Bell was behind both of us and then it overtook us.
And did the Bow Bell in any way obscure your vision of the Marchioness?
No, I clearly saw them collide.
Do you have a recollection now as to where, in relation to Southwark Bridge, it was that you saw the collision?
Yeah, before they entered the centre arch.
Of which bridge?
Southwark Bridge.
If you look at page 4070, towards the bottom, you say this: having gone under Blackfriars Bridge, we approached Southwark Bridge with the Marchioness now in front of us. At the end of the second line, you say, we went under Southwark Bridge and the Bow Bell did also. By this time, it was in front of us. As we approached the next bridge, it seemed that the Bow Bell turned to its right, hitting the rear left side of the Marchioness.
Well, the police told me the name of the next bridge.
So, let me ask you, so what you told the police was that you'd gone under Blackfriars Bridge and then Southwark Bridge?
No, what I told the police was we went under Blackfriars Bridge. I described to them what I saw and they basically told me it was Cannon Street Bridge, that the impact had happened. I had no reason to argue with them at the time because I thought the name of the bridge was not that important at the time. So that's why I signed this statement saying it was under Cannon Street Bridge.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
Mr. Stefano, can we look at your statement? Now, you say, I could see the wave of the Bow Bell. It was getting bigger and nearer to us, as if it was coming diagonally towards the south bank of the river. At one point, as it was coming alongside us, the Hurlingham started to rock in its wake.
Yep, that's correct.
Now, how far away was the Bow Bell when you felt this rocking?
20, 30 feet, 40. It's hard to say. I mean, it was close and it was big, close enough to make the record jump anyway.
How far ahead of the Bow Bell was the Marchioness as it passed you?
Well, the Bow Bell was travelling at greater speed, so it was getting near all the time. We even commented, they're going to crash.
No further questions.
Thank you, my learned colleague. Mr. Stefano, I represent the families and survivors in the Marchioness contact group, and may I just say on their behalf, they would like to express, because, well, it's never been said before in public, gratitude to you and others like you on the Hurlingham, who made every effort to save as far as you could those who were in the water.
Well, I did everything I could to try and save people.
Yes, and I just want to deal with that, if I may. One of your first reactions was, in fact, to try and undo life-saving equipment that was available to you on the roof of the Hurlingham.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then, in fact, you personally lowered somebody else, and it's all in the witness page 04103, for those who need it, by their feet over the side of the Hurlingham in order to try and get people out of the river.
Yeah.
The other area I want to ask you about, if I may, is just to clarify this course of the Marchioness. Now, as you passed under Blackfriars Bridge, you say in your statement, the Marchioness passed us. And then this is the next sentence. The Marchioness went through the arch to our left. Does that mean that the Marchioness went through the centre arch of Blackfriars Bridge, as well as heading towards the centre arch of Southwark Bridge?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yes, and she stayed in front of you roughly on the same course, heading for the centre arch.
Yep, that's correct.
Yes, thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Stefano, I am here from the Department of the Environment, Transport and the Regions. Just two areas, please. The launching of the life-saving apparatus on the Hurlingham. At the third page of that statement, paragraph 9, you say this, we then tried to undo some of the life-saving equipment. There was some difficulty in untying knots, and then someone cut them free and we threw them into the water. I'm trying to establish is whether they were actually tied to the vessel or just that they were lying on the vessel but tied to each other.
No, I can't recall that. Though the ring I threw in the water was tied.
That was cut free, was it?
It was cut free, yeah.
You refer also to throwing a floating mattress into the water. Was there any difficulty in getting that loose from the Hurlingham?
I think some of the ropes might have been painted over. Everyone obviously had difficulty. They were saying, pass the knife over and cut this loose. So I assumed they had difficulty in cutting. Once it was loose, I assisted in hauling it over the side.
Okay, thank you.
Extract from the evidence of Douglas Henderson, captain of the Bow Bell.
Captain Henderson, you say on the night in question you never saw the Marchioness.
No.
I wonder if the witness could speak up a little.
Yes, I know it must be daunting business giving evidence in front of all these people, but if you could just speak up a little, we would be most grateful.
Do you accept that you should have seen her?
No.
Do you have a reason as to why you didn't see her?
No.
Was it your duty to keep a lookout for such vessels?
Yes.
Thank you. Captain Henderson, turning now to the subject of communication on the vessel, did you hear anyone shouting to you in the moments before the collision?
No.
But you had VHF sets and walkie-talkies. Was it your practice to use them as communication from the bridge to the forecastle?
No.
Well, was this a practice you inherited?
I was advised that they were unreliable.
By who?
I can't recall.
Well, do you know if they worked or not?
I never used them, so I don't know.
Did you consider that the communications were adequate between the forecastle and the bridge?
I thought it could be improved by the use of a hard wire communication system.
And did you express this view to South Coast Shipping?
No.
Why not?
It was supposed to be in process.
Did you think using the bell would be better than shouting to the bridge?
I thought it was no better or worse.
Do you accept that if you had seen her, it would have been your duty to slow down and give 5 blasts on the horn in order to avoid a collision?
My duty would have been to take whatever action was necessary to avoid collision.
I see. No further questions.
Good morning, Captain Henderson. I'm Michael Mansfield, and I represent 87 relatives of those who suffered as a result of this collision. Would you agree your understanding and ability to judge the capacity and resourcefulness of the men you employ is crucial to running your ship?
Yes.
You agree?
Yes.
How many times before you sailed on the 20th had you previously sailed with Mr. Blaney, your lookout?
I don't know.
Could you recall any trips at all where Mr. Blaney did in fact serve as lookout?
No.
So we have no way, therefore, of knowing how you assessed that he was a good lookout before the 20th, do we?
No.
That in itself isn't very satisfactory, is it?
No.
Blaney later tells us, those investigating the collision, that he wasn't very good at judging distances. Were you aware of that?
No.
Well, he would have to be aware, I mean, roughly speaking, the distance ahead of the Bobel in which you, the captain, could see something.
Roughly speaking.
And perhaps the best way to do that is sort of take him up to the bridge and show him where the blind areas are and that sort of thing. Did you do that night?
No.
Did you give Mr. Blaney, your lookout, any instructions of any kind that night?
No, I thought he was adequately trained, would know his job.
Well, did you know how much training he'd had on the river as a lookout prior to the night of the 20th or on that night?
No.
Additionally, he would have to know, wouldn't he, how far in advance you would need to know about the presence of another vessel so that you can take avoiding action before it's too late.
Yes.
And for all you know, his idea of a safe distance could be very different from yours.
No, I don't think so.
Well, is 20 to 25 feet a safe distance for a vessel?
No.
He thought it was. Did you know that?
No.
So your ideas of safety are very different from each other then?
If he can judge 20 to 25 feet, like he says, our ideas are different. Yes.
Well, leaving aside the precise measurements, obviously, in case Mr. Blaney doesn't know what 25 feet looks like, one of the problems with the bridges being arched, as it were, is that in order to get through them, you've got to take the centre arch as far as possible. There isn't a lot of room to manoeuvre. Any error of judgment could lead to a disaster, and the lookouts, they would need to be aware of this. He would be looking to make a judgment about how long you would need to know about other vessels travelling ahead of you under the bridges.
Yes.
Yes, so roughly speaking, how long going through the centre arches would you need to know?
About 3 weeks. A lot of warning.
Yes, a lot of warning. And did Mr. Blaney know that you needed about 3 weeks worth of warning?
No.
No, an error of judgment by you, Captain Henderson.
Yes.
It would have been perhaps better to say to Blaney, look, it's night. Visibility isn't as good as during the day, so keep a sharp lookout. If you see anything, I'll need a lot of warning, especially as your only form of communication was shouting. So it helps if you can see the person who is doing the shouting. Now, between Nine Elms, when you set off, and Southwark Bridge, did you see either man on the forecastle?
I assume so.
Well, previously you said you don't remember.
I don't know.
Well, they would need to know where to stand to communicate with you by shouting, would they not?
I would expect them to know without me having to tell them.
Yes, all right. You would expect them to tell you if you had at least hit a vessel, would you not?
Yes.
And you were not told that on the night, were you?
No.
I'll deal with this aspect quickly. Now, I've assumed that night it was, as you said, a calm, clear night, good visibility all evening.
Yes.
You had the bridge windows open. The engine, which is underneath the wheelhouse for ventilation, has skylights on the casing. So with the proximity of the wheelhouse to the engine, it makes it rather difficult to be heard. Who's doing the shouting, does it not?
No.
Well, I'll put it to you, just so that it's completely clear. Mr. Noble at the helm thought it was difficult to hear what was being said. Mr. Blaney himself thought he could do no more than merely alert you to the fact that something might be wrong. Is that not the true position?
No, it was. The system was you were capable of transmitting a message from the bridge.
Well, I want to suggest to you that it's only capable of transmitting a discernible message and an intelligent message to the crew if the boat is in the dock with the engines off, not moving. That is the only situation when you can clearly hear someone on the forecastle, is it not?
I do not agree with your statement.
Are you aware that by August, the installation of a proper communication system on the Bow Bell had been overdue for at least 1 year? Did you know that?
I know that now. I don't know if I knew it then.
So it follows that you personally made no fuss to the owners or operators or managers saying, now look here, if you expect me to travel on the river at night, I want a telephone system. Nothing like that to them from you?
No.
No. Okay. Well, the area approaching Southwark Bridge is particularly hazardous. And to proceed smoothly, you really need to make sure of two very important factors. One, you've got to ensure that the water ahead of you is clear and that there's nothing in your way. And two, that you have plenty of warning in the event of a potential collision. I mean, it's too late to be told at the last minute, isn't it? Because it takes 2 lengths of your ship to stop. So that's what, about 3 minutes of time?
Yes.
Yes. You have a horn on board the Bow Bell for warning blasts when approaching the bridges. Did you use it that night?
No.
Why not?
Well, it didn't seem necessary at the time.
Yeah, but it's a pretty rudimentary caution, isn't it, to blow the horn?
Yes.
Yes. Were you exercising caution on that night, were you?
I've never known anyone to sound a klaxon between the bridges.
Oh, come on, really?
Unbelievable.
But you were aware then of the collision regulations in this very document. If we look at PLA regulations on the subject, I'm just going to quote from it now. In narrow channels, bends where other vessels might be obscured, vessels shall sound the appropriate signal. Now, did you realise it was in fact mandatory for you to sound your horn on the river?
For a narrow channel, yes.
Well, that's what it says in the rules.
Yes.
Yes. Is it the true position that on the night you basically left everything to Mr. Blaney? You thought, well, he'll deal with it. And anyway, we're a larger vessel. Everything else will just get out the way and we can just carry on. Was that your attitude, in fact?
No.
Where were you standing when you first emerged from Southwark Bridge in relation to the wheelhouse?
I do not know.
Well, Mr. Noble is at the helm. We know that much. The centre of the bridge, just in relation to him, Mr. Noble, was he suffering from impaired vision or hearing?
He wore glasses and a hearing aid.
Right, and Mr. James, he's on the bridge as well. Now, you entered a deck log, which is attached to the table at the rear of the wheelhouse.
That's correct.
And in order to fill this log in, you have to turn your back on the bows of the boat.
Not necessarily totally away from it, no.
Yes, but when you're filling it in, you're not facing the direction you're going, are you?
That is right, yes.
Yes, and you noted down the routine Woolwich message at 1:45 in the log. Now, we know the accident occurs at 1:46 or thereabouts, a few seconds more perhaps, but at least from the report that comes in. Now, is there any possibility that, in fact, the collision occurred while you were filling in the log?
I don't know.
Well, you do not know, so there is a possibility that the collision occurred with the Marchioness whilst you were filling in that log.
There is a possibility, yes.
There comes a point where you realise, in fact, that you have hit a vessel. Now, how did you become aware? Because, well, we know it's not from the lookabout.
I do not know. I mean, I cannot answer the question.
Well, I ask you this. Did it at some point, and I appreciate we're only dealing with a matter of seconds, did you at some point see wreckage?
According to previous statements, yes, but I cannot remember now. I do not know whether I'm imagining it or visualizing. I would like to be of assistance, but I just cannot answer the question.
Well, it was perfectly plain that you hit another vessel. Worse, in fact, that you'd sunk her and people were in the water.
Yes.
Right, and I want to ask what you did for those people. Now, are you aware what your obligations were as master in relation to a collision in which people may be injured?
Yes.
What was it?
After ensuring the safety of your vessel and everybody on your vessel, to render all possible assistance to the other vessel.
Yes, and there are other provisions too, and I quote, if the master in charge of the vessel fails to comply with this section, and no reasonable cause for such a failure is shown, the collision shall, in absence of proof to the contrary, be deemed to have been caused by his wrongful act, neglect, or default. Now, would it be fair to say that you did nothing to assist, did you?
No, it would not be fair.
Really? What did you do to assist the vessel that you just run down?
I took the decision, which in my opinion was the only practical decision to make, that I had to get my vessel away from the area to allow for more suitable craft to carry out the rescue.
Yes, you made a decision which was essentially to preserve your own vessel as far away from the scene as possible.
No.
Let's go through the provision on the Bow Bell of life-saving equipment. You had 2 lifeboats aboard that could hold roughly 16 people each.
If you say that's the size.
And then you also had a 12-man life raft. Now, is it the case in order to get that to work, you simply just throw it over the side and it self-inflates?
No, you must get it over the side and pull the painter out to its limit, give it a sharp tug, and then it will self-inflate.
How long would it take to do that?
A few minutes.
A few minutes. Additionally, you had 10 life buoys or rings. 4 of them could be automatically released from the wheelhouse. It would have not endangered your vessel at all to release them.
No.
No, so why did you not do it?
I did not think at the time.
You also had parachute flares. I mean, the object of those in general terms is to light up a space in darkness so you can see what's going on.
No, they are distress flares.
Well, you were distressed. So is the fair answer to all of these questions is that you really did not think about saving other people's lives at the time. You were too concerned, in fact, about getting the Bow Bell downriver.
No, that is not fair.
Well, is there a signal on board for all hands on deck?
Yes, an emergency signal. You ring the alarm bells.
Yes, but you didn't ring it. Why was that?
Because I did not think it was necessary, because...
Captain Henderson, do you accept that there was rather a lot during this voyage that you did not think was necessary? I mean, on reflection, do you think it was necessary to alert your crew to the fact that your vessel, the Bow Bell, might be damaged?
Everybody was alerted.
Well, were they? Mr. Westcott, the cook, the first aider on board, how alert was he?
I don't know.
I think you do know, Captain Henderson. He was drunk and asleep in his cabin, was he not?
So I've been told. I did not see him on that night, and I have not seen him since.
Well, is there any possibility that you yourself that night, as well as other members of your crew, were suffering from an overindulgence of alcohol?
No.
Right, I would like to take you back a little. In 1979, you were dismissed, were you not, for being in the pub rather than being on board your ship where you should have been?
Yes, I had one drink.
And when you come to apply for your job with East Coast Aggregates, you chose not to reveal any of that.
I did not reveal it, no. I needed a job.
Yes, you needed a job and you were prepared to effectively deceive your potential employers about problems in your past.
That was dealt with properly, in a proper manner.
Well, that was one occasion that we know about, but in 1986, do you remember a vessel called the Gun, do you?
Was a foreign flag company. I can't remember the name.
And you were in fact dismissed from that company, were you not?
No.
And then in 1994, you were suspended by the owners of the Bow Bell again in relation, once more, to the allegation that you had been drunk.
Yes.
Had you been?
No.
Had you behaved in a bizarre way so that somebody thought you might have been drunk?
No.
Oh, I see. So nothing untoward at all then?
Well, I fell over.
Just tripped, was it?
I slipped on some gravel, fell over.
I see. Going back to the night in question. Now, on this particular night, before you boarded the Bow Bell, you went to the Prince of Wales, where you had a pint, Builder's Arms, where you had another pint, Battersea Arms, where you had another pint, the Red House, where you had another pint, and the Duchess of York, where you had 2 pints, lucky for them.
Yes.
Yes. Is there any possibility you had more than you said?
No.
Never more than 6 pints?
No.
Even on that basis, were you concerned that over that period of time, that amount of drink might have affected your ability to make judgments?
No.
No, I see. Thank you. No further questions, Miller.
Mr. Henderson, as you understood it, who was on duty as lookout?
Blaney.
So when he came on board, did you say to him, "You are lookout"?
No.
And how did he know that he was there?
I don't know.
So, if someone had asked you that night who was lookout, your answer would have been, "I don't know."
Yes.
That wasn't very satisfactory, was it?
No.
No further questions.
Captain Henderson, before 1989, did you ever have a drink problem?
No.
Now, during your training, you served under Captains Burley and Captains Niven?
Correct.
During that time, did you ever see anyone issued with walkie-talkies from the bridge to lookouts?
No, never.
Ever receive instructions on lookout?
No.
No instructions whilst in training?
No.
Were you ever given any training from masters as to the exact precise duties of lookouts?
Not at all. No.
Yes, well, thank you very much for coming, Mr. Captain Henderson.
Sir, excuse me, sir. I am John Perks. My son Stephen died on the Marchioness, and I have a question, if I may. I am represented by counsel, but I have one personal question, if I may, please.
And if you have just one question, by all means, ask it.
I have heard Mr. Captain ask Captain Henderson 92 questions in the last 30 minutes that he has answered with little difficulty. But I am somewhat confused and distressed that for 1.5 days, Captain Henderson could not recall, did not know, could not remember, or had no comment, or had no explanation to questions asked by others. Thank you.
Extracts from the closing remarks from Michael Mansfield, QC, Eileen Delalio, and Lord Justice Clark.
Sir, thank you very much. When Jonathan Davis and others stepped onto the Marchioness that night, August 20th, 1989, they were entitled to expect, as every member of public is entitled to expect when they step onto transport offering itself for the purpose of public travel, that there will be a culture of safety, not just on the river, but on the roads and in the air and on the railways. Now, what's happened in this particular instance, unfortunately, and it is replicated in many other areas, is that there is effectively a culture of inertia. And from that, also a culture stemming, which is one of irresponsibility. But what is truly shocking, my lord, what is truly shocking is that this was a matter which had been foreseen. Now, in 1983, it was clearly expressed at a meeting at which Mr. Creeber and others were present that it was not a matter of if, but when there would be a serious accident involving a passenger vessel, resulting in a heavy loss of life would occur, a matter of when. Unfortunately, all throughout this inquiry, there's been much evidence in the vein of, well, it's not too bad considering the number of voyages on the river. That itself is a very symptom of the culture of inertia. If I may put it more graphically, my lord, you do not bother with a pedestrian crossing until enough people are killed to merit one. So, against this background, I would like to indicate 5 propositions which summarise our submissions that I've put in, and they are these. Firstly, that Captain Henderson was not fit to be plying a vessel on the River Thames. And I will come back to that. Secondly, that the vessel he was in charge of that night, the Bowbell, should not itself have been on the River Thames. Third, that ready-mix concrete was not fit to own a shipping company which had vessels again plying the River Thames. The fourth, that the Marchioness as a vessel was also not fit to be on the River Thames. And fifth, that Tidal Cruises as an organisation was not fit to be operating pleasure craft on the river. Now I'm going to pause there for a moment and return to Captain Henderson, because what has been revealed is quite a shocking history of deceit by Captain Henderson. And I will deal with it now, because had I had the material then, I would have put it to him in cross-examination. And it can be seen in the transcripts of page 146, where I asked him about the foreign flag company he'd worked for. Were you dismissed from that company? His reply on oath, no. We now know in no uncertain terms that he was in fact dismissed. Then on a second occasion, on which he was also dismissed, he fabricated his entries in his watch-keeping certificates. Basically, he filled them in himself. He signs them as master. He's forged a signature. He also has forged his conduct on this vessel. Unsurprisingly, his ability is excellent, and his sobriety has been written as beyond reproach. So this is remarkable deceit by Captain Henderson. Further lies in his statements to the police. Page 419, he states Quantrill and Blaney were posted forward as extra lookouts. Complete rubbish. Against this deceit, it is not surprising that at both of Captain Henderson's trials, the jury was unable in both cases to reach a verdict. What a different verdict there might have been if he had told the truth from the very beginning. That, sir, is the point. Now, I'll also make mention of the Port of London Authority. And it was clear very early on that there was a basic incompatibility between the presence of large vessels like the Bowbell and passenger vessels like the Marchioness on the River Thames. On such vessels with restricted visibility, how do you know if a lookout is being kept? Do you wait until there is a collision or loss of life? Or do you monitor? We say you monitor. And such matters are within, we say, the jurisdiction of the PLA. The responsibility for the Marchioness itself lies not only with its owners, Tidal Cruises, but with the Department of Transport. And this basically is, as we described in our arguments, the ship was a coffin ship. The policy was to let us have all-round visibility from the helm, so you do not, in the learned words of my friend, Mr. Haddon Cave, have to be a giraffe to look out the back. Then we have ready-mix concrete. What is astonishing, truly astonishing, we say, was the arrogance of these individuals who would think it was some way virtuous not to know anything. In fact, they did even not know how many companies they were directors of. I mean, it's simply not good enough to say, well, we left it all to somebody else. Even after the incident, we say, regrettably, not a single example among any of them of sincere regret towards those who died. We say the public will find that reprehensible. Looking to the future, sir, we hope you will add your weight to recent government proposals concerning corporate liability, in particular the law on corporate killing. Now, I quote from part of it now. A corporation is guilty of killing if management failure by the corporation is the cause or one of the causes of a person's death. Now, this document was formulated this year by the Home Secretary, and we say, were the proposals in force now, Mr. Ormsby, Mr. Samuels, and others would be in the dock in 1989, had it been a law then. These proposals were put forward because of the Herald of Free Enterprise, the King's Cross fire, and the Clapham and Southall, Paddington, and most recently, tragically, the Hatfield rail disaster that occurred only a few weeks ago, put forward because I may point out that there has only been in the history of corporate manslaughter 3 successful prosecutions. 3. That is, of course, what this bill intends to circumvent. Now, if companies, corporations, and organisations know from the very beginning that there's going to be a thorough investigation, well, they might well begin to put their house in order to prevent such things from happening in the first place. That really brings me to my last point, sir, public confidence. What the families have been concerned with from the very beginning is the lack, in the first place, of a thorough investigation within a timescale that made sense, when memories were fresh and documents were available. All they ask, sir, is in future, other families benefit at a much earlier stage, and in that way, the nature and value of the democracy in which we all live will be very much improved. Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you. We now have reached the end of the hearings, and it simply remains for me, I don't know about simply, to write a report. I would just like to say, by way of postscript, that no one who has listened to the evidence could fail to be struck by the enormity of this tragedy. I would like to extend my own sympathy and that of my assessors to the families of those who lost their lives and to the survivors who have suffered so much. I understand, but finally, Mr. Lalio may wish to say something.
Thank you, sir. For the benefit of people who don't know me, I am Mrs. Eileen Deladio, and I lost my 19-year-old daughter, Francesca Julia Maria Deladio, my only daughter, that night. As we approach our 12th Christmas without our children, our brothers and our sisters, our family and our friends, we ask this investigation to begin the process of fundamental change in legislation which still allows the sector of corporate greed to overshadow responsibility and accountability. Some person or persons are responsible for those deaths. 11 years later, no one has been made accountable. There must be something seriously wrong with our laws in this country that allows this to happen. We, the families and survivors, call upon this investigation to endorse the recommendation of corporate accountability and furnish the cost of this hearing, not to the taxpayer, but to the perpetrators of this loss. Why should the public pay the price for their incompetence? Let us offer you, sir, this opportunity to use this case as a sounding board to make real changes in the law to protect the general public from the disregard of corporate minds. To quote a very famous Prime Minister's words, to stand against the unacceptable face of capitalism. In their neglect of safety, as other recent national disasters have confirmed, we still have not learnt the lessons of the disasters such as the Marchioness. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching our production today. It has just been a rehearsed reading. I would like you to put your hands together for all the actors that took part from the Outcast Creative. I'm just going to give them a little applause myself because they certainly deserve it. Thank you very much. Please do subscribe to the channel and keep watching. We'll be tackling other interesting topics soon, including the General Post Office scandal, among others. You can look forward to our Christmas production coming up in December. We'll be telling you more about that on our channel in due course. It just remains for me to say, on behalf of everyone at the Outcast Creative, what a privilege it was to read this script again. And we would like to honour the memories of those who sadly passed away 32 years ago on this very evening. We do hope that this contributes towards the discussion about corporate liability and safety on all of our modes of transport, which needs to be at the forefront of everyone's minds going forward. Thank you sincerely, and thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you all again soon. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you on behalf of all of the Outcast Creative.